Good morning, fellow insurance industry professionals from all over the world, and welcome to the 7th edition of the InsureTalk series. Today, we have a good mix of speakers from around the world, with some amazing local speakers as well as a speaker from Germany, making this particular InsureTalk series a truly global event. Due to the lockdown and with a lot of insurance industry events being cancelled, CN&CO have created the InsureTalk series to make sure that as an insurance industry professional, we are all connected. We still continue learning from each other. And while we're learning from each other, we do earn valuable CPD points to make sure that we maintain our professional standards. So the InsureTalk series has become the hub of the insurance industry events, and in a way keeps us engaged whilst maintaining our IISA professional membership by earning CPD points. Today's session is proudly sponsored by Santam, and we would like to thank them for their generosity. We know that these are challenging times in the economy for everybody, and so sponsors, we truly appreciate your help. And we also like to thank you for everybody from around the world for joining us today as we explore today's theme being the accelerated cyber threats from leading insurance industry experts. On today's agenda, we have Wolfgang Boffer from Munich Re joining us from Germany, followed by the monthly update from the insurance industry, the IISA, sorry. And then we have a bit of entertainment to make sure that you relax. We know that you have been social distancing. The entertainment will come from Neil Rediman, a phenomenal performer. And then Zaman Ngidi, the client manager from Aon, will talk to us about the value of brokers in cyber risk assessment and needs analysis. Charles Weckerman, CEO of Avis Risk, will share some business and risk mitigation tools with us. And the last speaker for the day will be Matthew Gurren from Gurren Group, who will share with us some insights with regards to a new era of cybersecurity after the COVID-19. And with time permitting, at the end of the session, we will take some question and answers. Please submit your question and answer session, your questions through the Q&A and not through the chat box. Please note that this session is also streaming live on YouTube. So if you have colleagues in the industry whose companies are not allowing them to have whatever tool that they need to use to access the session due to cyber threats, please ask them to connect with us via YouTube. So some house rules before we start. If you need to take a call, use your bathroom. And you should know where your bathroom is in your home. I'm not gonna direct you to that. If you need to smoke, keep yourself on mute and enjoy your ciggy. Our first speaker of the day is someone well known in the insurance industry, a very familiar face on the Insurance Apprentice, as well as on this platform. Today, I am switching tax. I am in his hot seat, and I hope, Mr. Coleman, I do represent you very well. He is the Managing Executive at SHA and will present to us on how to approach cyber risk from an underwriting perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome, AKA Judge Dredd from the Insurance Apprentice, Mr. Simon Coleman. Simon, over to you, my brother.
Thanks so much, Tao, and yeah, well done. That was a great intro, and thank you for welcoming me. I must say, it is rather strange for me to be delivering a presentation rather than emceeing, for a couple of reasons, partly because I'm also on my first trip from Cape Town to Joburg. I've been in Joburg the whole week. So I've been my first traveling since March, and yeah, everything is just very strange. I don't know if anybody else can relate after being locked down for so long, but it certainly is. It's great to be moving around, and as always, it's great to be chatting to all of you today. I'm actually going to be I'm going to be spending the next half an hour just talking about cyber from an underwriter's perspective. I guess I've been fortunate enough to have been exposed to cyber since the sort of late 2000s, when I started seeing some of the first policy forms floating around South Africa. And at the time, I have to say, whenever we had a conversation with our brokers, it was very much almost a science fiction. We'll get to that when it becomes an issue sort of discussion. And of course, that is no longer the case. So I think it's moved right to the top of everyone's list of exposures. We're busy running our SHA annual review at the moment, just gathering the data. And that's come across very strongly. More than 50% of the brokers that we spoke to said that they'd noticed an uptick in requests for cyber. The new business that flows from that is there's a bit of a lag, but there's certainly a lot of excitement around it. And in spite of the depressed economy, there do still seem to be quite a lot of sales happening. So I think that's really great stuff. And so what I'd like to do today is really just sort of give you some of the insights into what we're seeing as underwriters. Sorry, I just want to get to my slideshow here. You don't have to do this when you're emceeing. 1 second. Sorry, guys. I should have had this open already. So what I'm going to be doing is just giving you the perspective from an underwriter. I know we do a lot of talks about the product itself, but not really going into behind the curtain, so to speak, as to how we as underwriters approach the risk itself. So, sorry, I'm having a technical issue here. Can you believe it? Sorry, guys. Bear with me 1 second. Okay. Sorry, here we go. I'm good.
Now
I've got control.
Now
I know how it feels.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Glad you experienced today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, given me a new sense of appreciation.
Absolutely.
So I think it's probably important that we just kind of touch base on what we mean by cyber. And I'm not going to go into these in a lot of detail because I think most of you have been exposed to this already. But you can throw things like identity theft of funds or data, ransomware, extortion, vandalism or hacktivism, espionage, terrorism, also something that businesses and insurers and reinsurers around the world are certainly worrying about. And then, of course, we've got the issue of accidental breaches. And I think it's important that we just acknowledge that, because often we jump straight into conversations about cybercrime and we completely ignore the fact that a lot of breaches actually happen where there's no hacker involved. And in fact, all that has happened is an employee negligently has disclosed or allowed access to confidential information. And of course, that is also something that is covered by a cyber policy. I like to split cyber cover into these quadrants. Policies are not structured this way, but this is the cover that comprises almost every cyber policy. So if you were to look at these 4 areas, you could isolate the liability element, and that is, of course, where your legal costs and your damages and settlements would be covered. So, if we have to defend an insured after there's been a data breach, it would fall into that quadrant. Then you've got your own damage elements. And this is, of course, why we stopped calling these products cyber liability some years ago, because of this quadrant. And this is really where your investigative costs would be covered, your forensics, your incident response, your restoration if the system has to be rebuilt, or if there's work that has to be done to get things back up and running again. Your business interruption falls into this element. And of course, your ransoms and your extortion amounts at the present time would also be covered in that quadrant. as well as theft of funds, not covered by every cyber insurer, but many do. And then, of course, you've got your reputational risk. Now, this is probably less important to smaller businesses, and perhaps something that your listed companies and your corporate entities spend more time focusing upon. But certainly the costs of getting your public relations experts, your marketing experts into the picture to try and mitigate the damage. And let's face it, being splashed all over the media because of a cyber breach or a cyber incident does do some reputational damage. So you are required to manage that. And then we have the regulatory quadrant, which I have to say has just become a lot more important to all of us in South Africa. We should have been paying attention to it all along. But since POPI was fully enacted in July, or fully implemented, businesses now have a year or so to get their ducks in a row. But it's on us. And when we look at some of the claims stats, or rather the incident reports, I think it's probably worth noting that we're probably seeing more activity now because businesses are compelled to start talking about it. And your fines and penalties, as long as they're allowed to be insured, would also be covered in this quadrant. So I also just wanted to talk about, call it the evolution, or I like to refer to it as the revolution of cyber insurance, because if you go back to the sort of mid-90s in the US, the cyber policies were originally packaged with other covers. They weren't standalone. When it became evident that this was a risk category on its own and started to gather some momentum and produce some claims, it was deemed necessary to have standalone products, which saw us moving into the late 90s and early 2000s. That standalone cover, of course, largely being bought by corporates around the world, large companies, particularly those that were listed or in the Fortune 500, which meant that getting the cover was quite a complex process. And that's where we landed up with our sort of 15 to 25 page proposal forms, which granted worked in that environment because often it was your cybersecurity officer that would be completing that document. But it was totally over the top for the SME sector. So as the insurance market started focusing more on small to medium-sized enterprises, a different way of thinking was required, and you had another evolution of the product. And that's where we landed up with the embedded covers that we see now. So in many policies, like in a public liability policy, you might see some elements of cyber liability cover, not the first party elements. And then, of course, we saw insurers offering integrated risk management. And I know there's some speakers today that are going to be talking about that, where it wasn't just about getting cover. It was also about accessing technology and other services that would help to mitigate risk. And then, because underwriters, I think, to some extent, were growing quite frustrated with the slow uptick in cyber sales, we saw the market getting quite creative on how to introduce the cover, particularly in the SME sector. And I like to call these the post-loss underwriting products. Now there's nothing wrong with them as such, but what the market has sought to do is to reduce the number of questions that are asked of an SME, was just to kind of say, look, we'll insure you as long as you've got these things in place. And of course, that is, it's a quick way to get the clients to understand how cyber operates, but it does come with risk, because if you're not fully aware of what those minimum requirements are, it means that the claim is literally going to be assessed, or the policy is going to be underwritten only when the claim is submitted. And of course, that leads to all sorts of problems. And it means there's incredible pressure on us as a market, brokers and underwriters together, to make sure that if we're using those policy forms, that those minimum security requirements have been carefully explained to the insureds. Otherwise, you're going to land up with all sorts of TCF issues. Now, it's a cycle, because then you find you're going back into some packaged solutions, certainly lower down in the SME sector, and then again into standalone. So we don't expect to see the back of complex application forms, for instance, but we'll rather be in a constant cycle as these products are developed and become more popular in the market. How does this feature in South Africa? Well, I mean, depending on which survey you look at, you're going to find South Africa appearing somewhere in the top 10 or 20 of highest cyber exposures. And I'm not saying that any of these reports are correct or incorrect, and perhaps it's irrelevant. Depends on how the study is done. What we do know is that cyber in South Africa is an issue. And it's not just a survey that we're looking at to get that. We're seeing it in claims activity and reports that are being produced by some of the large internet security companies. This was in the 2017 report published by Symantec, where they said South Africa was the most phished country in the world. 1 in 785 emails were actually phishing attacks. And you can see that we were almost double the exposure of our neighbor, which was the Netherlands in that particular report. What have we seen locally? Well, 2016, we had the CN&CO hack. At the time, that was one of the larger ones locally. Almost every month, you're seeing reports of attorneys or estate agents being involved in some kind of security breach, which has really led to money being moved out of a trust account. Those are individual type exposures that we're reading about. In 2017, the deeds office data appeared on the internet. Doesn't appear to have been any criminal activity behind that, but one of those accidental breaches that we were talking about earlier. More recently, 2018 saw the Liberty extortion. At any given time, you can see articles. This particular one online is about ABSA, but you could pick any financial institution and you'll see a customer somewhere complaining or alleging that their bank account has been hacked. And just this year in February, we had Tracker, where their systems had to be taken offline because of an attack. We had Nedbank, and then of course the big one that everybody's been talking about was the Experian hack, where 24 million identities were actually taken. And then shortly after that, we saw Stefanuti stocks shut down. And these are just some of the large entities that have suffered some kind of security breach just in the last couple of years. And it does feel like it's accelerating. And I would kind of challenge us all to say, is it really? We know that the risk of hacking or the risk of cybercrime is increasing as time passes. But what we also need to acknowledge is that since Poppy was put into full effect in July, that we're just starting to perhaps get a little peek behind the curtain, and we're seeing the reality that has probably prevailed all along. It's just that many businesses haven't felt compelled to talk about these things publicly in the legislation. I know Matt is talking later about COVID, so I'm not going to go into this in too much detail. Safe to say that during lockdown globally, there's been a spike in cybercrime, and with more of us being online, away from our secured environments in the office, yeah, let's just say it's ripe pickings for cyber criminals. So what are the underwriting challenges? You know, what are the things that we have to deal with as the people that assess the risk, fix the premium, come up with the wording? And these challenges, we deal with these with our brokers, but you know, we could say there's just an absolute explosion of data points. You know, 5 to 10 years ago, companies may have just been using their own data to generate business, to improve their operational efficiencies, whereas now they're plugging into thousands more data points. And we'll have a little look later at what the impact is on things like risk accumulation because of this. So companies are using a lot more technology. They're relying on inputs from a lot more sources from outside. And that does, of course, come with an increase in exposure. We also have an increase in the complexity of risk. And particularly if you're talking about the larger and corporate risks, A business that has 20 or 30 subsidiaries, if you're lucky, all in South Africa, but possibly dispersed all over the world, that is a complex risk. Having even the old 24-page proposal form completed isn't really going to give enough insight into that exposure. We know for a fact that when you have multiple subsidiaries, often they're not using the same platforms. They've got different management. They may have different cyber governance strategies in place. And these are some of the challenges that we have to overcome to try and put together a program. Of course, compounded by the fact, as you'll all know on this call now, we never have enough time to do this. There's pressure on you, the broker. There's pressure on the underwriter to put this together. And I'm sorry to say, but often, these things do come down to some degree of thumb sucking or pricing for capacity, rather than drilling down into the level that's actually required to understand the exposure. And then, of course, we have the pace of change. What we're talking about here is ensuring a risk that exists purely because of technology. And technological advancement is just one of those things that you really struggle to keep a hold of. And I know for insurance brokers, particularly those of you that don't work in the global environments, you're expected to not only understand cyber, but of course to also look at all the property portfolio and some of the other specialist insurance. And it can be quite difficult to keep up to date with all of those changes. And even as underwriters, where we might only be focusing on one line of business, it's challenging. And we have to rely extensively on our global partners, our reinsurers, and our risk management specialists to help us with that. And of course, I think it's every underwriter's responsibility to continue to share those insights with their brokers as we go through this cyber journey together. From a customer's perspective, we have to keep this in mind as underwriters. These onerous requirements that are in a lot of the policy forms. We spoke earlier about the embedded cover where post-loss underwriting takes place. It's fair enough to have a reasonably priced quote and it was easy to get on board. The onboarding process was literally, saying this is the limit that I want. These are my company details. And yes, I acknowledge that I'll have these minimum security requirements in place. It's easy enough to onboard a client on that basis. But when the claim comes, if they don't fully understand what those conditions were or what they were supposed to be doing on an ongoing basis, not just at the time of purchasing the cover, we're going to have a problem on our hands. So it's absolutely critical that we as an industry make our clients aware of these things when we sell these types of policies. I think it's also important for every business to understand. We get a lot of requests from technology companies that are being forced to buy cyber insurance by their clients, which may be a bank or another financial institution. And it's tempting for them just to say, just give me the piece of paper. I need to show that I have the cover. And it would be remiss of us to sell products on that basis. So I do think that we need to pay more attention, particularly to these lower level, easily onboarded products that have these minimum security requirements. There's a lot of confusion around coverage, not just amongst customers, but amongst brokers and even amongst some underwriters. The products tend to be quite modular, and it's not always clear which cover is more appropriate for which client. A financial advisor has a much bigger data breach exposure than a manufacturer, who, of course, would be more worried about their factory staying up and running. So, business interruption more important to the one, and the liability cover more important to the other. So that coverage confusion, of course, we have to take responsibility for that and make sure that we can educate our clients and each other as to which covers are more appropriate. And then, of course, we have this ever-present problem of unawareness. Sticking your head in the sand, And when we did our survey last year, we've seen the same results again. Almost 50% of the businesses we speak to tell us that they don't believe that they've got a cyber exposure. And if you're using technology, that is an impossible conclusion to arrive at, because everybody that is connected to the internet has some kind of cyber exposure. And we have to bear collective responsibility here for educating our customers. Of course, if you don't have an awareness of cyber crime, then you're going to be doing absolutely nothing about risk management. And of course, this is just going to lead to another problem and probably an uninsured loss at some point. And if you think there are industries that are immune, I did this presentation a while back to the agricultural sector. And, even in agri, farmers are now being targeted. They're using a lot more digital technology. They've increased automation. They're using the Internet of Things. They might be trading online. They've got all sorts of process automation in place. And just like everybody else, they're subject to the same privacy regulations. So even in what you would perceive as perhaps quite an obscure industry, like agri from a cyber perspective, they have an exposure, and we should, of course, be talking to clients in that sector. When we price our risks, we also have to factor in things like risk accumulation. And this is less relevant in some of the other specialist classes of business, like public liability, for instance, or PI. But when you're talking about cyber, because there's such this total and interdependence on technology, the likelihood of a systemic risk resulting in an accumulation exposure is ever present. Some of the reports suggest that we're going to be looking at 75 billion IoT, that's Internet of Things devices connected on the web by 2025. And that's probably underestimated, actually. We've got this dependence on certain global technology companies. I've just mentioned a few here, but Amazon, Google, Microsoft. Businesses are spending, looking here, $182 billion in 2017 to over $300 billion in 2022. Moving into the cloud, great. You could argue much lower risk, but the accumulation risk increases with every business that jumps into that environment. So also something that we have to keep in mind when we're doing risk assessments. And then we have interdependence on industry-specific service providers. And Experian is a perfect example of this. I'm sure there's many of you in the audience today who received an SMS from your bank after the Experian incident. And you may have wondered, well, how did this happen? So many banks, financial institutions were relying on the services of Experian. And there are many other companies in the South African environment that have that are that pivotal to other industries or to other businesses. And if you have a systemic or an attack at that level, the accumulation risk does stack up quite quickly. And that's not to mention just the sheer volume of random attacks. And we saw things like massive ransomware attacks like WannaCry, NotPetya. It just seems like there's a constant flow of these things that we have to keep in mind. When we do our rating and we're looking at things like accumulation, what we're looking at on an individual risk basis, these are the drivers of the premium. We look at the annual revenue, we look at the industry sector or sectors if it's a big business, the employee numbers, the number of people that are actually connected to the network in a business, obviously incident history like any other line of business, the number of personally identifiable confidential records, and if it's a business that's transacting with credit cards. These are not the only factors we look at in determining whether we would like to participate on the risk, but these are the general drivers, along with the limit and the deductible, of course. These are the drivers of the insurance premium that's being charged. Of course, no presentation would be complete without us chatting a little bit about risk management, and Charles is going to delve into that a little bit later. I just wanted to to kind of show you this matrix, because it's often assumed that the insurance is separate from the risk management, or that having the insurance eliminates the need for any of the other quadrants. And of course, that isn't the case. And any risk management professional will tell you that this is just one element of the overall risk management strategy. Some of these come at a greater cost than others, and possibly the least expensive, particularly for small businesses, is to focus on education and enforcement. Education is just making staff aware. We all upped our education so that we could make people aware of the exposures during lockdown. We had people far away from our IT specialists in the company. So we had to step up our efforts to educate people on what they should and shouldn't be doing online when they're working away from the office. And those things come at a relatively low cost if they're done properly. But it's no good having rules and educating people if there's no enforcement. And this is where we see a lot of these strategies falling down, where businesses are saying, look, there's an HR process in place that you can't visit certain sites, or you can't use the office technology to access certain platforms. And when there's a breach, often, and when I say a breach, I mean a transgression, I should say, of a staff member. Often it's not the case where there's any HR action that follows this. If somebody left the front gate open to the factory and it was cleaned out in a robbery, there would be repercussions. There would be disciplinary repercussions for that. And I would say that leaving the keys out or unlocking the door is possibly not even as bad as allowing other parties to come into the system. Giving out your password. I mean, there are all sorts of incidents where employees are really the proximate cause of the cyber attack or the data breach. So the enforcement is really important, along with background checks and other things. And then, of course, you have the insurance itself, which is critical and a critical part of that risk management strategy. Don't be fooled into thinking this is only a big business issue or only an SME issue. I found that these four basics you can overlay these on most businesses in most industries, and they'll have relevance. Of course, the detail behind it will be quite different. Technology is, of course, the best thing to deploy to manage cyber risk, but it wouldn't stand alone. We could spend R1 billion today on cyber security, but if I don't train my people and tell them not to click on certain things, I've just wasted R1 billion, because the weakest link is not the PC, it's the person sitting between the chair and the screen. So that's also something to bear in mind. I don't know if you've checked this site out, but as I get to the end of my presentation, take a screenshot or go onto that website later. It is safe, but if you put in your email address onto the Have I Been Pawned website, it will, of course, run through all the big data breaches and will tell you if your email address has ever been compromised. And most people that I've referred to have come back and said that at least one of their emails has been compromised in one of the big data breaches. And to wrap up, there's a quote by the former FBI director, Robert Mueller, who was the director in March of 2012, or he said this in 2012 rather. He's of course more famous recently for the Trump investigations. But I love this quote. He said, "For it's no longer a question of if, but rather when and how often. I'm convinced that there are only two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that will be. And even if they are converging into one category, companies that have been hacked and then will be hacked again." And I'm Simon Coleman, and I thank you very much for listening to me today. Thank you.
Wow, Simon, thank you so much. We truly appreciate the insights and the information that you shared with us today. And I certainly will check out the Have I Been Pawned website as soon as we are done here. Thank you for submitting your questions on the Q&A button. Please submit them on the Q&A section and not on the chat section. Christy, thank you so much for the questions that you have posted. And our panelists will respond to the questions online, and should we have time at the end of the session, we will be able to respond to them. And now we know that the lockdown has been extended. It will continue until the 15th of November, 2020. And the finance minister has asked the president to postpone the midterm budget speech. However, at CN&CO, they have decided that we will not stop learning and engaging. So please make sure that you book your seat, reserve a spot for your InsureTalk8. This will be the last one for the year. It will be taking place on the 26th of November, normal time from 10 until about 1 o'clock. And it will probably be sponsored by Santam, and CPD points will be credited. And now, for the monthly update from the IISA, and for those of us who don't know, the purpose of the IISA is to elevate the credibility of the insurance profession. And we are grateful that today's session has been awarded 2.5 CPD points by the IISA. So to the IISA, thank you so much for all the hard work that you do. Please welcome the CEO of the IISA, Ms. Thokozile Mahlangu, for the monthly update from the IISA. Thokozile, over to you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is that time of the month when we give you an update from IISA utilizing the InsureTalk platform. A lot has happened since lockdown. As we near the end of the year, perhaps limping and emotionally drained or tired, we would like to remind you of the importance of continuing professional development. It is important to do at least one CPD activity per month that helps you to keep abreast with the activities in the insurance industry or the financial sector as a whole, to remain relevant and just to enhance your knowledge. The CPD activities include writing articles, conducting presentations, book reviews, guest lectures at training institutions, education, attending technical meetings such as the ones that SAIA hosts, mentoring others, and the common one being attending workshops and conferences. We have started planning for the 2021 conference. We believe that social distancing will remain. The conference will therefore have three options, one being the live sessions at Sun City or live streaming at the comfort of your own home or office. The third one will be live streaming at a conference venue, either in Durban or Cape Town. As I said, the conference will take place at Sun City. We will honor all the social distancing protocols. So at each conference center or conference venue, there will be the limits per the protocols that will be applicable at that time. We will have exhibition on a diary basis in order to manage the social interactions. We are also planning to shorten the duration in the near future. We are also exploring various options that would meet your needs as our customer. We therefore appreciate feedback on what experience you would like to have at the upcoming conference. As I said, we will share details in the near future. We will do that through our events organizers, CN&CO, also our media partners, conference media partners, as well as on our various communication platforms, social media, our emails, so watch this space. That's something to look forward to as we near the end of 2020. So watch this space as we prepare for yet another premium insurance event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thokozile, for that update, and thank you to you and your team at the IISA for bringing professionalism and prestige to the insurance industry. We truly appreciate the effort, and we certainly will take up the call to action in terms of the CPD points. Our next speaker is coming all the way from Germany, and he will share with us some thoughts on the global exposure and cyber experience. He has been with Munich Re for more than 12 years and is currently the Business Development Manager and Senior Underwriter for Cyber Risks in Southern Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome, South African virtual warm welcome to Mr. Wolfgang Bofo. Mr. Bofo, stage is yours.
Thank you very much for welcoming me today. So I hope that you can hear me well, despite that I'm so far away today. I'd rather be presenting in person. just to give it more flavor, to see how people react and to be able to answer questions in a coffee break. But let's make the best out of it. I've prepared a few slides to give you insights into the global exposures, the experiences we have as a reinsurance company. So I will be echoing a lot of what Simon has just presented. But to also allow you to understand who I am, I would like to introduce myself with like 4 pictures. I'll give these pictures a little bit of a story. And it's about risk and risk awareness. So not so much in sticking the head into the sand, but I know a lot of people who see the post at such a beach, they wouldn't actually go closer to the water and tip the toe in there. I know that in Port St. John's, there is a beach, which is the 2nd most deadliest in the world, just outside of Port St. John's, because this is where a lot of Zambezi sharks are killing people. And actually the picture taken on the bottom part in the background, that's me. And it could have been taken at Pretoria Banks, where you see these roost-hacked sharks. It's not taken there, but I did dive at Pretoria Banks. So I know what I'm doing. I know that it's about risk awareness, and this is what I always like to bring along into discussions on cyber risk. I've been with Munich Re for 12 years, 13 years to come. Before I joined, this gentleman basically got me into a job of risk consulting. I've spent 3 years in Singapore to work for Munich Re, heading the corporate insurance department and bringing innovation to the Asian market. And many, many people in Singapore basically knew that person in person, because the gentleman's called Nick Leeson, and he brought down Barings Bank at the time because he was doing front office, middle office, and back office at the same time. He was under no control, and it got the Barings Bank into bankruptcy. So when I left university, it was basically Basel II. I'm a banker by education. Basel II was brought into the industry, which is now Solvency II for the insurance here. And I was focusing on operational risk management. So back at that time, operational risk management certainly had one pillar called infrastructure and IT. And I've come across many, many scenarios. These scenarios have the same story these days, i.e. the non-availability of systems or the non-availability of data, or the availability of data, but maybe data is manipulated. So it's still the same narrative. It's just frequency and impact that we have seen changing significantly. We just need to get it ring-fenced, identified, assessed, reported, and then after such reporting to management and decision makers, an insurance solution can be thought about as one tool to mitigate potential scenarios and the impact. So with Munich Re as my employer, I can proudly put this up on presentation. We've been very, very active in the past years on cyber insurance. We do this out of our primary operation through Ergo, but we also do it out of reinsurance for corporates, which I did. I was able to close deals known to the market with Microsoft or Swiss Federal Rail. Didn't have a policy at hand at that time, and it was basically crafting a policy to adequately transfer the risk exposure. We've been awarded this for 4 years now, and you can see basically the whys. We have started very, very early to take on IT security experts. We did this a bit in parallel to what we did a couple of decades back in engineering. So we had underwriters on the one hand side, they knew insurance. On the other hand side, to get 4 eyes together, we were taking on civil engineers to be able to assess construction risk. And the same we are basically trying these days. So we have more than 24 of such cyber IT security experts. We try to tap them off of Siemens or Airbus or other companies. And they are part of the assessment. If the risk is more complex, they have an even more important role. At the same time, if we talk about portfolios, it's about getting the right questions being answered, the appropriate length of a questionnaire for the industry, given by size, but also given by industry exposure. and to get a proper risk assessment done in a crisp fashion, shortly and snappily, but still adequate. The experience of Munich Re in cyber risk goes back more than 20 years. So you just think about the year 2K. We claim to be a leading market. We want to have a leading share in the market, and certainly a gross written premium proportion that we are proud of. At the same time, we need to watch things very closely, and this will be part of my presentation, where I'm trying to give you insights of what we see at the moment and what kind of developments we have to be aware of. As cyber risk is often a little bit misunderstood, i.e. if it's not property and if it's not casualty, but somehow it's a risk and somewhere we can find computer being mentioned, it must be cyber. I'll just try to tidy up, to clean up such misunderstanding. So the beauty of underwriting cyber risk is that you actually start somehow greenfield if you set up a policy or an approach how to transfer. And what we regard as cyber risk is actually anything that comes from digital. So that can be the storage, the usage, the computation, and also transmission of data. From such cyber risk, certainly there is cyber peril. And the right-hand side of that slide now is focusing on the latest technology. So on the next slide, I will have a screenshot of our tech radar, just to give you an understanding where 5G can be potentially in 5 years' time. But if we had put up that slide 5 years ago, we might have put down IoT or Industry 4.0 more prominently. So Industry 4.0 has already faded from these slides. But I think it comes without saying that even in COVID times, and we work from home and we use our smartphone more often, that we all depend on the availability of such services. We all depend on the availability of correct data. And this is why it's no longer just a liability matter that you staple such a policy add-on to a professional indemnity policy, and you completely forget about the first-party elements. That you can't operate successfully, you can't collect money, you can't invoice people if you don't have the data, the relevant data yourself. So summing up on cyber risk, this is basically threaten the digital values. It can affect everyone in every company. It entails both the first and the third party elements, and it must not be an add-on to existing standard policies unless you quote for it adequately and you make it an affirmative part of traditional policies. And as I was asked by a colleague just recently, so obviously in KwaZulu-Natal, someone was stealing the box where application forms were dropped. Well, certainly this is not cyber risk. This is a confidentiality breach. This is very physical. And as it is very physical, you can't put it up for cyber risk. So the only way to try to get your arms around would be that a person has personal liability insurance, that the application being dropped there is misused, that a digital identity is created, and then funds are going to be stolen, and then you can basically have this covered. But this, as such, a physical crime is not cyber risk. So that's the 10th track radar that Munich Re started to publish a couple of years back on an annual basis. The ones marked with a plus or darkly colored is certain trends that we have spotted in the past year. So they made it to the tech radar. And you can see that all the buzzwords being mentioned there, they are somehow very, very real. So 5G is very real. Cloud enablement is very real. Payment models is very, very real. And all these things basically depend on the availability of certain services, must be correct algorithms being applied. It's about confidentiality, of course, and it must function. Yeah? So it must not malfunction, it must function. And you can pull out other charts or developments on the value creation. So if you look at the value creation out of physical assets and the intangible assets, then clearly these charts are telling a story. More and more value creation will be done digitally. And this needs to be taken into account also with a proper portfolio of insurance policies protecting such value creation. So the question is there already a cyber risk market? Well, of course, there is. I'm starting some 5 years back. It's a global view that you can see here. It's estimates, like best estimates that we have as Munich Re all the way to 2025. And if you now put the numbers behind this, then clearly the biggest market that we see in 2020 is still the United States. I will be touching on this as an experience. I will touch on the why the United States is that far off. If you if you take the estimates for Europe into that equation, which we estimate around $1 billion, you can basically ask the question 5.3 plus 1 is 6.3. So you have 700 million left. Maybe that's for Asia. There's also strong markets like India and Japan. Not so much China, always a little bit underestimated. But obviously the government doesn't want cyber insurance to be placed in China. So there is hardly any cyber insurance. If the government is changing the mind from one day to another, there will be massive cyber insurance. So you have to be on your toes. You have to be prepared to also be part of that party. So what's left for Africa? If I look into South Africa as a country, there's more than 50 million people and there's more than 500,000 SMEs. I know that number can be lower, that number can be much higher, depending on which database you're consulting or which press article you're consulting. But I think there is massive potential. And the service offerings, the product offerings we have, it will be touched on by Charles later. An SME compared to a large corporate, they wouldn't have IT security experts in-house because they don't even have a chief information and security officer. And if they have a problem, i.e. they can't operate because the screens are black, you can't switch on your computer, or you have reason to believe that you're hacked. Usually the small and medium-sized segment, they don't have roadside assistance as with a car. And they are most happy and most grateful and most appreciative if they have a number to call and someone is deploying the experts to get you back into operation. So the offering for small and medium-sized companies, commercial space, I think it's a very comprehensive offering which is out there. It's well structured, it's not overloaded, and it's coming at a competitive price because it not only compensates a financial loss, it is also taking a service element into account, which is crucial in such a situation. How mature are these markets? And I wanted to bring 3 examples. So the first is India, and the second is Germany. Being German, of course, have to touch on Germany a little bit. That's my home market. And on the left-hand side, you can see various criteria of what is making such markets a market. And breach regulation is certainly of assistance, but breach regulation as such is only valuable to us as an insurance market to get a market going if the level of litigation and the fines are substantial. So some colleagues of mine in South Korea, they were keeping fingers crossed that in Korea, such regulation is brought into place and is going to be enforced. But as the level of litigation and the fines are rather immaterial, people basically don't care to have proper insurance in place. It certainly is, if you look into the SME market segment, it's an awareness topic. In Germany, I believe the companies these days are pretty aware. I think they're just not aware what the policy is going to offer. But the market has picked up, so we are writing substantial premium. Certainly it could be more. But the backbone of the German industry is the small and medium-sized segment, which is also displayed in the lower part. And it's mainly driven not so much by liability matters, it's more driven by the availability of first-party data to be able to operate, because a lot is manufacturing, a lot is first-tier, second and third-tier supply chain topics, and manufacturing certainly is one of the top occupancies that we have. I've put down the United States, so to no surprise, I've said this before, this is certainly number 1 in this digital competitiveness rating. We've seen big losses in the country. Everyone knew about these events. My most favorite on the nationwide known events and the high cost given through tough legislation is Sony PlayStation a couple of years back. They lost about 70 million set of data. The notification cost at that time was trading at around $50 a set of data. So you just do the numbers yourself to work out just the sheer cost of that event. What usually isn't mentioned, but all this happened at the end of the year. So it was present time, it was Thanksgiving, and it was Christmas, and a lot of games were actually being produced for Sony PlayStation 2. But people no longer wanted to buy a Sony PlayStation. So they actually went with Nintendo or Microsoft. And this, again, usually not mentioned, but this was even driving the cost at Sony for that hack and the loss of data. In addition, it's that some senior executives actually had to step out of office. So also this was well known. It created awareness in the EXCO meetings that such cyber insurance. Okay, so I had an echo. I guess someone's unmuted and is muted again. So obviously senior executives got aware about the potential losing the job in such a situation, and they also were made aware by D&O insurers that actually such insurance is available. It's regarded as a must-have because you can buy it, and this has basically brought that market into action from one moment to another. So let's keep the fingers crossed for South Africa. I would say that this is a market on its toes. There's a lot of media coverage on the massive number of hacking activity. And POPI now being in place and eventually being enforced 1st of July 2021 is ideally helping the case. As an overview, I've put together the legislation throughout the world as a few examples. You can find POPI on the top, on the bottom part. On the top part, you can see the GDPR, and the fine print in blue under GDPR is not that GDPR, what GDPR is all about. This is actually already the next evolution of such data regulation, taking into account artificial intelligence and the like. But if you are dealing as a South African country, if you are dealing with overseas clients, customers from Europe, you are already somehow liable if you do not protect such data properly. So from a risk assessment perspective, you believe you have no such enforcement. No, actually you have if you deal overseas with Europe. Sometimes we have the feeling that this is not appropriately taken into account, but you must be aware that this can basically have all the reach to you in South Africa too. The development of all this, I've started on the premium with 2016. So this now is a 15-year time span. The Sony PlayStation hack is also mentioned a couple of times because they didn't have only one, they had a couple. Yahoo had a couple. You can see the losses in US dollars, but you can also see the number of records being stolen or the number of records that went missing. And the redlined ones are the ones, especially under the GDPR fines, are the most recent. You can add H&M, the retail outlet store. That was not hacking, but they were fined too because they were basically tracking and tracing their employees about breaks at the washroom and other stuff. So that is also not allowed under GDPR, and they were just recently fined. So what you can see from that chart, the frequency goes up. What you can also see from that chart, the impact goes up in terms of the number of data being stolen, and at the same time, the fines being called up by the authorities. So I mentioned that the criminals are somehow very dynamic too. And if you look at this chart, this is taken from a study from Falcon Overwatch. It's a report being published on a regular basis. And just digest the numbers on the left-hand side regarding the criminal activity. So in the first half of 2020, we have had already more activity as in the year 2019. So we are only halfway through, and we already have seen more activity than in 2019. So this can also be called a wave, and it's exponential growth. On the right-hand side, you can see the breakdown, and the breakdown into industry segments. And you may recall what we have had just before on the majority of markets. So technology, manufacturing, financial, healthcare. So all this seems to be industry segments where the trend can't be denied. And the criminal activity certainly is in that field because, for example, healthcare, they never cared about the IT security architecture. So we have had many, many cases in Germany, but also in other countries. It was just easy. It was like an open back door. It was like a kid's game to basically go in. The softer cases are to basically tell them, look, guys, we have your data. The more threatening cases are if you are in the surgery room and if there is surgery done with the support of computers, that you can't be sure that all the machinery is working properly. So it's highly exposed, and it's also highly exposed to us from an underwriting perspective, because we know that there was hardly any investment done from an IT security perspective. The same is public sector, municipalities, or universities. All this is a big, big problem, because to now catch up, maybe the awareness is there, but maybe not the budgets. And now to catch up and make it a safer case, i.e. to close not only the back door, but also to have proper padlocks on the front door, that's quite a challenge. And this is why our risk appetite from an insurance perspective, we are a bit careful in writing these risks. You can work with sub-limits, you can work with loadings for these particular industry segments, or you might as well say this is an industry segment that should not be added to your portfolio regardless. I've brought along this one, and I give you a little bit of a moment to read across. It's taken from the dark web. So I've put the tip of the iceberg. It's very recent, so it was taken from the 7th of October, so basically last week. I've pointed out the number of experts that we have and where we try to pull together a very strong team to support underwriting and to support pricing, to support claims mitigation, but also have an overview of trends, because at the end of the day, where does it accumulate the most? With the reinsurer. And the colleague is looking into the dark web, certainly not with a Munich Re computer on the Munich Re computer network. It's a standalone computer. And the threatening element on this one, if you have now gotten to this here. So now we've seen cases where criminals basically know that insurance is in place. And even more threatening or shocking is that they know the limit. And in this particular case, they were basically saying, well, what's the problem? You guys have insurance. We know the cover for extortion is $1 million. We know that you get the money from insurance. We're not asking more than that. We're not asking your money. We're asking the insurer's money. So just get your act together and pay us. Otherwise, we're going to compromise even more. And we put you on the pedestal and we will publish all the data that we have. I've mentioned before that I worked in Singapore for 3 years. I arrived in 2015. And when I had the first talks about cyber insurance and the potential, I ran across the information that kidnap and ransom in Singapore is not allowed. Kidnap and ransom, for example, in Japan is not allowed. In Singapore, it clearly is, because the people of Singapore shall not be an easy target for criminals to be kidnapped. And then insurance is going to pay for that. So when we had these discussions about data, that potentially data can be kidnapped too, and is basically putting a spark to a criminal market that hasn't been on fire so far, the message was loud and clear that also data can be regarded as kidnap and ransom kind cover. And this must not be done in Singapore or in Japan. Also last week, it was an American authority, and maybe not all the things coming from America, from the United States are good. But this particular paper I did like, because it was highlighting the trend I'm pointing out here, that actually such criminal activities must not be supported with insurance paying the ransom amount. The paper is looking into sanctioned countries, so we don't yet know where all this is going to. I'm a strong believer that insurance needs to be supporting those being hacked and where data was encrypted with service providers. But I would have a very, very fair understanding just to signal loud and clear to criminals, you won't get easy money. And the money you're asking won't be paid by insurance because they have a bag of money they sit on. So let's watch this space, how all this is going to develop going forward. There's one last item I wanted to bring to your attention. This is what we call silent cyber. And I was touching on the add-ons of cyber risk when I started with that presentation. So certainly there's traditional property and there's traditional casualty covers out there. And slowly but surely, the digitalization starting from 2000, so year 2K, online banking, the first smartphones, the first applications. Now we are in 5G, and the property and the casualty segment, they've only incrementally developed add-ons. And very often they have not really taken the real risk scenarios, the impact scenarios into account. They were not asking additional premium for cyber that was coming in as a clear peril, because maybe it wasn't asked in a proposal form that was reused from the year before or the year before last. And now with cyber and the cyber perils, you have various scenarios like the non-physical damage BI scenarios if you have no data or you don't have the systems available. You have certainly the extortion or the data restoration topics. You have network security liability. On the more like the top part, I've put the example from before. You have confidentiality breaches, but if it's physical breach, if it's physical crime, then certainly it can't be called cyber, but at the same time, very often it's a blend. And the jobs that we did in the past together with our cedents was basically to iron out or to weed out the cyber risk elements and either affirmatively leave them in the property policy, but ask the risk adequate premium for it, or to affirmatively put it in a cyber risk policy and only ask a property premium for the physical damage elements that should be covered under a property policy. The two examples here, it's basically the same industry. You can find many other examples, but I wanted purposely to use an industrial plant here because the property damage coming from a hacked fire scenario, if you put this into the cyber risk portfolio these days, i.e. you put the physical damage being caused on a refinery, or if you look into marine, losing a vessel with all the container, or to go to the right-hand side, losing a cruise ship with all the passengers, that can't be taken up by a cyber risk portfolio these days. And it must be, if a real scenario, it must be risk adequately priced, either as an add-on to property or to liability or to a cyber risk policy standalone as a separate kind of risk, separately being priced for. So we have to wake up cyber risk in this aspect. And I skipped this one because I know that there is people talking about COVID in a moment. I've also found a couple of screenshots about South African hacking activities. And I'm happy to see that I think only Experian is the one where it duplicates with Simon's presentation. The most recent I learned about was basically the one on the bottom right part, so that your Justice Department was hacked. The article is dated 1st of October. I think we knew about this Monday evening that week. I think it must have been the 29th or the 30th of September, because my colleague looking into the dark web, he has just found, because he called it a day, he's just found the information that they were compromised. And 2 days later, you were able to read about it in the media. So the key message is, if you partner with the right insurer and the right reinsurer in the background, there can be very comprehensive offerings, because time is key. If you get hacked, you need to do the backup stuff. Charles will be touching on this, I'm 100% certain. So I leave this for him. And I would like to close with my blue screen. So not the blue screen in a negative sense. I thank you very much for your attention. And please, please keep an eye on your passwords. Make it rather complicated. You can still, like this one, you can still easily remember if you only get into your own systematic of using special characters or low cap. And yeah, thanks for your attention. I'll be joining until the end of the session, and I'm also taking questions as they have come up at the end of today's webinar. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Buffer, thank you so much from all of us here in South Africa. We truly appreciate the insights and the great talk that you shared with us. I mean, I was looking at your presentation and the examples that you gave, like you said, very similar. It added more value to what someone had already shared with us. And I like one of your comments that you mentioned when you said that South Africa is a market on its toes already. I think that says a lot about our next item, which is some bit of entertainment, and we will then be on our toes dancing as we normally do. Harry Belafonte once said, you can cage the singer and not the song. Even though we are still in lockdown and we're still social distancing, CN&CO always bring you great entertainment at these events. And today we bring you a highly acclaimed South African singer of cabaret, folk song, and opera music. He has worked with some of the best singers in this country, and he has done 2 productions on the West End in London, performed all over the world in the past few years in solo concerts, where he was applauded with standing ovation. Ladies and gentlemen, InsureTalk brings you Mr. Neil Rademan. Neil, the stage is yours.
Good day, everyone, attending the InsureTalk7. I am Neil Rademan, and I am the CEO of a classical music festival in the Southern Cape called the Hesekwa Harmonie. And I would like you to join me today in 2 beautiful songs. I would firstly like to sing Bésame Mucho, Kiss Me Many, Many Times, and then an old favorite for many business people, My Way. Thank you so much. I hope that you would enjoy it.
This thing is something new, my heart enfolding you. Never know this thrill before. When I thought I'd be holding you close to me, whispering it to you, I adore Bésame, Bésame mucho. Como se fue esta noche, la
Now, as you can see or hear, I'm not just the CEO of a festival, I'm actually a classically trained singer, and the genre that I practice is more cabaret. So now I would like to sing you this very well-known song that Frank Sinatra was so famous for. I hope that you would enjoy My Way.
The end is near, and so I face the final curtain. My friend, I'll say it clear, I'll state my case, of which I'm certain. I've lived a life that's full. I traveled each and every highway, oh, and more, much more than this. I did it my way. Yes, there were times I'm sure you knew when I bit off more than I could chew. And when there was doubt, I let it open, spit it out. Oh, I faced it all, and I stood tall, and did it my way. I loved and cried. I had my fill, my share of losing. And now, as tears subside, I find it all so amusing to think I did all that. And may I say, not in a shy way, oh no. I did it my way. Oh, what is a man? What has he got? If not himself, then he is not to say the things he truly feels, and not the one, oh, when it yields. The record plays, oh yes, and I took the blows. I did it more.
I hope that you will enjoy the rest of the day, and I hope that you enjoyed this. Remember to love one another and to enjoy life. Have a beautiful, beautiful day.
Oh, bravo, bravo, Neil. Yes, truly, we love one another in the insurance industry. And thank you for that amazing, amazing performance. And certainly, as the insurance industry in South Africa, we do it our way. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I would just like to briefly introduce to you a video from Fulcrum Collections. Fulcrum is South Africa's foremost provider of premium collection and premium finance solutions to the insurance industry. They've established their name through providing brokers, insurers, and underwriting managers with back office financial support services that allow them to de-risk and optimize their operations, and most importantly, to focus on their core business, providing the policyholders with great insurance product and services. From their legacy collection systems, which provide brokers, UMA, and insurers with an effective electronic debit order service to their newest product innovation, Fulcrum Air Collect, which completely de-risk premium collection by splitting single debit into net premiums, commission fees, and value-added product components, and paying the recipients directly. One can see how Fulcrum collection has grown and adapted with the times. So, can I ask that we play the Fulcrum video, the Fulcrum collection video, please, and please stay with us. After that, we have Zamani Gidi from Aon joining us.
Fulcrum Air Collect. Meet the future head on. The Fulcrum Air Collect platform builds on the industry-accepted Fulcrum Collect Direct model to offer insurers and intermediaries a progressive new solution that negates much of the administration behind existing granular information from a source policy administration system. Fulcrum Air Collect allows for a single debit against a policy bank account to be credited to multiple pre-approved destination bank accounts. This means that net premiums are directed to insurers, fees to intermediaries or UMAs, and VAP components to VAP providers. Our partnership with Mercantile Bank allows us to perform the split instantaneously in the air. Fulcrum Air Collect gives insurers and intermediaries greatly improved control and transparency, and access to valuable data insights that can be tailored to suit individual needs. The system is rules-based, ensuring that it is flexible enough to facilitate current and future compliance with RDR, SAM, and TCF, amongst other regulations. The evolution of our industry-leading premium collection model can be broken down into three parts. First, the legacy model. We from owned bank account, holding the funds for up to 45 days. This resulted in a large premium liability owing to insurers. Then, Fulcrum Collect Direct. Fulcrum recognized that the risk to insurers of having significant sums of their premium in the hands of third parties would become an unacceptable risk. In response to this, we developed Fulcrum Collect Direct. The model facilitates the collection of a debit order directly from the policyholder account into an insurer-owned bank account. The premium is placed directly into the hands of the insurer, effectively mitigating insurer risk. Finally, Fulcrum Air Collect. We applied the lessons learned from the legacy collections and the Fulcrum Collect Direct models to develop the greatly enhanced Fulcrum Air Collect system, a single debit against a policyholder account to be credited to multiple pre-approved destination bank accounts. Fulcrum Collect Direct model in the following ways. Payments don't need to be released by insurers, which means no delayed commission and VAP payments. VAP payments are not processed into third-party insurer accounts, and the extent of the VAP business is not visible to the primary insurer. Fulcrum becomes independent of broker bordereau. Optimization of administration between Fulcrum and brokers. Brokers' commission is not collected into insurer bank accounts. The solution accommodates annual premium deposits. Large co-insurance policies are split and paid to the relevant insurer immediately. Key benefits of Fulcrum Air Collect. As the model will be able to accommodate annuals and deposits, insurers' outsourced premium collections are fully de-risked. Premium is delivered immediately, helping insurers meet solvency assessment management needs. Provides premium collection information per policy, including historical information. Payment bordereau based on actual premiums collected and actual unpaid, allowing insurers to verify information provided by brokers. Information can be provided immediately upon receiving premium debit order files and updated once unpaids have been processed. This will enable insurers to get detailed information about expected cash flows per broker. Insurers no longer have to wait 45 days for their premium information. The data on premiums will be managed in real time. The rules-based system is fully RDR compliant, and any new RDR outcomes proposed in future can easily be accommodated. This includes changes in the SAM environment, treating customers fairly, and the Financial Advisory and Intermediary Services Act. Dynamic reporting provides both brokers and insurers information per policy, including success or fail, refunds, fees, and VAPs for brokers only. Gross premium, including payments without any manual intervention, reducing the risk of fraud. The data-rich service provides insurers accurate information on their underlying risk book. Full integration will be provided between policy administration systems and premium collection for participating system providers. Premium collection will be seamless to the user and can be set up to operate without user interface or involvement. At Fulcrum, we incorporate future-aligned technologies to meet today's and tomorrow's insurance requirements.
Thank you so much, Fulcrum, for that message. Much appreciated. May I ask that Simon and Wolfgang, please could you engage with our audience on the Q&A button, and if you could respond to some of the questions that have already been posted there, we will truly appreciate it. And to the audience, please remember to post the questions on the Q&A button and not on the chat button. And also remember that don't miss the last InsureTalk series for this year. It will be happening on the 26th of November. CN&CO events online, the bookings are open, so make sure that you go onto that website and secure your booking. Otherwise, you're gonna miss out. And it's clear from our last message from Fulcrum that brokers are very important in the insurance industry distribution model. And our next speaker will share with us the value of brokers in cyber risk assessment and needs analysis. Zamani Ngidi is a client manager for Aon Cyber Solutions based in South Africa. He's responsible for delivering cyber quantification and cyber program designed to commercial clients operating within Africa. He also leads the cyber advisory practice delivering solution in South Africa and the larger sub-Saharan Africa. He's an associate member of the Institute of Risk Management in South Africa, and he's going to talk to us, like I said, about the value of brokers in cyber risk assessment. Zamani, welcome, and the stage is yours.
Much appreciated. I do hope everyone can hear me and everyone can see me, and more importantly, the presentation that's on the screen. So I guess Simon sort of gave us the underwriter's perspective. I'm here to be the friend, I suppose, and sort of give you an insight as to the way that Aon globally looks at cyber risk, cyber insurance, and obviously cyber security. So from the perspective of sort of laying out the agenda of the way that this is going to go, I'm sort of going to articulate the changing landscape from a global perspective in terms of data security, cyber risk, and sort of articulate that in relation to what's happening in South Africa specifically. I think Wolfgang did an absolutely phenomenal job in terms of giving us some of the general cadence from a global perspective. We're just going to hone in on some of that, and then from that we're going to say, look, let's start understanding the risks that are sort of systemic from things such as data privacy, the increase in digitalization and things of that nature, and how it relates to the business, and then I guess ultimately give you guys a systematic approach as to how you would treat that risk, at least sort of the Aon model of how we approach that. A number of years back, we acquired a company called Stroz Friedberg, which was started by the ex-special agent of the FBI, Edward Stroz and Eric Friedberg. And I think it sort of ties in with the general, with the general direction of where we see this risk being from an Aon perspective in terms of our clients, as being one of, if not the most pertinent risk, especially considering that we've sort of moved to a much more digitalized framework globally. So I think to kick it off, one of the things we've sort of noticed is that there's been a large increase in terms of intangible assets valuation over the past sort of 50 years, but we'll focus primarily, if you look at 2005 and 2018, looking at the likes of a GNE, ExxonMobil, Citigroup, and Walmart, where in 2018, all of the biggest companies in the world are sort of driven by what we call intangible assets. So what are those intangible assets? So one of the things is that they are such things as trade secrets, copyrights, and they're all predicated on the use of data, right? And sort of, if that's what's driving valuation and the increase in economic growth going forward, we sort of want to articulate what are those information, what are the assets that control that that revenue or that asset growth. And I think one of them is obviously those information assets. And when we look at tangible assets still growing relatively to the market, but at the same time at a much more stagnant pace. So that that gives us an indication that really what's driving business in this day and age is technology, is the way that we use technology in order to deliver solutions, for the general society, I suppose. So on the back of that, I guess we sort of come in and say, well, what does data privacy look like, and sort of why has data privacy been actually put into place from a global perspective? I think one of the things is sort of highlighting the the use of technology and the way that data is sort of used in the perspective of driving revenue. And I think a phenomenal documentary that sort of covered this was something called The Great Hack, which is available on Netflix, which very broadly is a documentary about how a company called Cambridge Analytica utilized information from Facebook to basically sway Republican voters to vote for the 2016 Republican Party, which was Donald Trump, in order to get key votes in key states and ultimately to win that vote. And a lot of this has been sort of under the purview of regulators all over the world in terms of how was Facebook using this information, how it was selling this information unknowingly to the consumer, and sort of some of this regulation has been built around that rationale of essentially there's this digital version of you, and this digital version has rights, and those rights need to be protected in a particular manner. So if we look at the countries that are all highlighted in red, they basically have heavy regulation and heavy enforcement, where the sort of orange looking at the yellow is more robust to somewhat moderate legislation. And if you look at South Africa, where once POPI's been enacted, we will be probably at a red. The reason why it's not looking like that at the moment is because we have this grace period of 1 year to get all the the private sector to comply with the act. And again, this snapshot is available on a website called dlapiperprotection.com. And to be quite honest, it's probably an outdated picture. If you had to go on it now, the picture looks a lot different. And I think if we look at the rest of Africa, there's been a huge drive in terms of implementing data privacy regulation. One of the reasons around that is to say, look, if we want to unlock the value from a digitalization perspective, one of those things is to be able to deliver your solutions remotely. So accessing a different geographical area. You also have to control, or rather process, the information in the regulations that are in those areas. So, the drive is around saying, look, we're going to unlock digitalization, but we need to make sure that we're all playing at the same playing field. And so in essence, when we engage with our clients, I think one of the value proposition with dealing with a global company like Aon is that obviously we have expertise in the likes of Europe, the US, Canada, Australia, where we can sort of understand the articulation of the way that information security structure should be in relation to the processing of data, and ultimately the way that the risk management, and as a part of that, obviously insurance, ties in. So given that very broad overview picture, we'll sort of tie in and start understanding what is that actual risk looking like from the perspective of what drives it. So we touched on some of the things in terms of digitalization, but primarily from a revenue perspective is saying, automation is basically how do we automate administrative functions. I think there's been a huge drive in things such as mobile banking, which is essentially taking the banking infrastructure and sort of lean and digitizing it to say, all of these things that you could do inside a branch, you can essentially do it all from your mobile. That's just one of the ways that sort of automation is tying in. And then also very briefly, I mentioned connectivity, right? So being able to access a different geographical area in terms of delivering your value proposition. I think what COVID has done in the past 6 months has been tremendous in terms of making organizations really think about their delivery mechanisms, incorporating technology in a manner very rapidly. And I think what that's done partly is sort of saying there's been some systemic risks that perhaps, you know, company owners don't understand, especially in South African's SME space. I think one of the sort of downfalls or pitfalls of our economic environment is that you have a large space of sort of SME clients that don't necessarily have the luxury of an IT budget as big as, for instance, a JSE listed company. And so they have to be very cognizant as to where they drive that spend in relation to what their biggest risks are. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as to how we appropriately articulate that. And now, in terms of the technology drivers, obviously there's things such as big data, utilization of the aggregated data via the cloud. Simon spoke about that earlier very briefly. You look at technology solutions utilizing virtual reality. You look at artificial intelligence, which is essentially trying to, again, automate some of the functions that are somewhat sophisticated. So if we looked at some of the use cases in America around a robotics unit or an AI unit that is basically learning sort of the precursors to certain disease and giving advices to patients to take certain medications, or looking at going through the case law for certain industries and being able to provide clients with the relevant information in terms of navigating that, and again taking a somewhat sophisticated process and sort of just automating via the use of that. Social media, we look at, as an example, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all being paramount examples of the way that's been commercialized. Cloud computing we touched on very briefly, and you look at things like distributed ledger and blockchain, which is essentially a disruptor in the financial market space, and some of the sort of proliferating solutions that come out of that have been absolutely incredible. You look at things such as mobility, which as we've seen via COVID, that being able to work remotely has been absolutely paramount for most companies. And then the Internet of Things, which I think was spoken about quite earlier on in the presentation. Now, with all of these sort of implementations and possible use cases of technology to better unlock the value for your organization in relation to the way that you deliver it to your clients, or perhaps even opening a different sales distribution channel. Now, you think about things such as a disruption risk. We look at production. We spoke about that very briefly via Wolfgang's example, talking about industrial control systems, the way that SCADA systems, if that malfunctions, what does the systemic risk from a property perspective look like? You look at distribution and supply chain, right? So what is happening from the third-party vendors that you have in terms of delivering a key piece of a key delivery model in your sort of information process, and in relation to sort of saying what systematic risk are we onboarding, right? You look at things such as critical infrastructure, again touching on those points such as cloud computing, and then obviously some of the risks around confidentiality, the way that information is sort of being processed. Are certain companies aggregating risks that they may not actually understand they're taking on? And I think with some of the clients I've been dealing with in the SME space particularly, is that they'll always have sort of one major client that they service, and they don't actually understand the nature or the systemic risks that come with the access privileges that they're taking on via servicing this particular client. And you have to sort of unload and say, look, your balance sheet may be looking, your revenue may be 30 million, but you're actually aggregating a risk that's closer to 200 million. And this is, these are some of the discussions of, again, I think one of the things when we looked at, we talk about data privacy very briefly, is there's a little bit of I would say a convergence, or that's not the word, a differentiator in terms of the way that we understand technology in relation to sort of the risk and, you know, how that drives revenue away from sort of the more developed territories. And I think it's you know, part of that is the articulation of that risk. I think Poppy's going to do a phenomenal job at actually sort of putting that spotlight to say, look, this risk has actually been here longer than what we thought. And these are some of the use cases. And I think the business environment is going to be better off from that disclosure requirement, because it allows us as a business community to learn and say, look, this is, you know, we need to have a discussion around cybersecurity. We need to have a discussion around the liability we're taking on. And then you look at things such as, you know, personal card information, personal health information, the way that those certain bits of information need to be processed, because they're sort of, you know, when a breach occurs, they're subject to multiple regulators, right? So the PHI, as an example, would be sort of subject to the National Health Act, and then also on the back of that, Poppy, right? So it becomes very, very litigious in terms of how do we properly assess the liability that comes from that, because again, the multiple regulations. And then again, talked very briefly about supplier risk. Now, there's we've spoken about the cyber insurance market, but also, you know, briefly talk about the cyber loss market as a whole, right? So what this means is basically the figures of the loss that have been occurring over an annual period. So in 2021, it's expected that, you know, cyber events are expected to cost roughly $6 trillion. And that's a pretty extreme figure, right? But I think if we had to look at a company like Mondelez, which suffered a breach, I think it was systemic of either WannaCry or the NetPetya breach, and that, you know, it's publicly available, and on their their Q4 annual report, they lost about roughly $300 million from that particular incident. These companies like Maersk also have lost hundreds of millions of dollars from an event that didn't, you know, that happened outside of their infrastructure. And these are some of the things that we need to think about, that sure, these risks may be big or larger in terms of organizations that are significantly larger than what we have in South Africa, but I think the risk is still there. I spoke to Edward Strauss about, you know, why is it that sort of Africa is a little bit behind on some of this? And, you know, his thoughts is obviously, you know, the regulation aspect, but also being conscientious that going forward is probably going to take a rapid uptick. And, you know, it has there's a perfect storm happening, right? You've got the dark web, which is essentially this, you know, anonymized internet, and then you have blockchain or Bitcoin rather, which is a way to, you know, a currency that allows us to transact anonymously. And if we look at, you know, some of the things we're seeing out of the dark web in terms of paying a particular coder to hack a company and then paying them via Bitcoin, you have, you know, the perfect storm of a crime that almost has, you know, no consequences for you. And these are some of the things that we need to think about, that perhaps we may have not seen or have occurred in South Africa, but again, because there's no disclosure, it's something that we think, well, you know, it doesn't exist here. So I think going forward, that's going to really see a huge uptick, especially not only from a client's perspective or a business perspective, but I think also from an insurance perspective. So on the back of that, these are some of the things that we need to take into consideration. So given all of that big and scary stuff, sort of give that contextualized picture, I'm going to go through something we call the cyber loop. So it's a methodology that Aon has developed. There's a white paper available on our website that sort of goes through these pillars in detail, but I'll sort of articulate the general rationale of the loop and then go into the pillars individually, just to give you a brief overview as to how they sort of segue into each other. So essentially what we're trying to do here is create an ecosystem that takes into consideration that the risk by its nature is a pervasive risk, right? And what that means is that the risk is ever increasing, it's ever changing. We know that what is applicable one day may not be applicable a day later. So we need to make sure that we're taking in data points at each and every pillar to make sure that we're making better decisions. Because if something does happen, we need to be able to point to something and say, this is what we were trying to do. This was what our Northern Star is. And this was the rationale behind some of the controls we were putting into place. So it's based on essentially, assessing the environment, quantifying it, building up the model to say, what does the insurance piece look like? So how do we actually sort of transfer that risk via a risk financing strategy like insurance? And then once we sort of understand that liability piece, we can understand and start planning around some of the incidents that we may not or may experience, right? So the assessment piece is basically understanding what current risks do we have in our environment? What are the most important assets we need to protect? What are the assets that drive our revenue? What are the most likely threats in relation to those assets? So if we're looking as example an Active Directory, are we concerned about such things as malware, ransomware attacks? Are we concerned about the social engineering aspect, right? Phishing emails. I think the numbers we've seen in the early parts of COVID increased roughly in terms of phishing. Phishing attacks increased roughly by 67% from the month of April to, I think it was April to May. And we're seeing that sort of steady increase during lockdown because, again, that importance on digital assets. We need to understand also what is the state of the security that the organization has and the controls we have in place. Do we do things like penetration testing? Do we do vulnerability assessments? Do we do executive vulnerability assessments, which is articulating what are some of the key players in the organization, their privileges and access controls? How could those potentially be leveraged to access data or to elicit data illegally? And then how do we balance, the needs of essentially taking on risk via using a digital distribution channel, but at the same time making sure that the company is risk resilient? And I think that's a really, really key thing. And always from a broking perspective, or what we see ourselves as Aon to our clients as a strategic partner, is to make sure we sort of enable clients to be able to navigate that pathway of being in a business enabler, essentially to say, look, if this is something you want to look at, let's make sure we're understanding what type of risk we're onboarding via changing of data processing, how that sort of changes the risk profile of the organization, and just making sure that we have the correct controls in place to sort of mitigate if something were to happen, something were to occur in a negative aspect. And then on the back of that is that once we've articulated sort of the environment that a client would have, we would say, okay, let's start quantifying what the risks associated with the key aspects, the key information assets in your information structure. And that would mean, so we'll use Active Directory and we'll talk about ransomware, right? So if you have an organization, what would practically happen if there was a period of 3 weeks downtime whereby a ransomware, obviously the ransomware would occur, but then on the back of that is saying, well, we need to remediate the ransomware. We need to make sure that that particular malware is no longer in our internal network, and that can take some time. Do we understand the business interruption loss that's associated with that? Do we understand that if that information is destroyed as part of the ransom, sort of the ransomware attacker strategy, do we actually understand that we have to sort of restore the data that was destroyed, and then on the back of that, notify certain individuals that information was compromised? What is the thinking around the ID theft and credit monitoring that we have to provide our clients whose information has been lost because we have a responsibility via consequential liability that may arise as a result of our breach. Those kinds of things we need to really think about and articulate, and we build out that scenario and build out the event management costs. We build out sort of those consequential liabilities. We model those out and we say, okay, this is what the scenario actually looks like, and these are the figures associated. And then once we do that, we'll stress test that onto the balance sheet via a risk tolerance study. And then, on the back of that is to say, okay, so we understand if an incident was to occur, these things would happen. Where is insurance going to help us here? What costs are this insurance product going to take? And I think, Simon went through some of those modular products quite nicely early on, and sort of touch upon them now, is that saying, things such as event management costs, things such as forensic investigators, getting the incident response team in, how many incident responders do you need and for how long? And just making sure that, okay, the policy limit as it stands, as an example, is 50 million. If we take into consideration the worst case scenario from that perspective, this is what it looks like, and this is where the insurance policy would help. And I think when we look at building up that rationale, and again, we're talking about sort of the circular journey that we're taking on, is that at each point, we'll start understanding certain things in our organizations that we may not be thinking about. We start putting people together from an executive perspective that perhaps may not have had the opportunity to speak when you're talking to, the CFO and the CISO, saying that, look, there's liability here that we need to make sure we have appropriate risk financing strategies. And because cyber is one of those things where we always just say, look, man, that's an IT problem. They'll figure it out and all will be well, right? But I think when you understand that a lot of your organization is underpinned by technology, I think that digital aspects needs to be sort of predicated on understanding the strategy and sort of the underlying pillars as to how that's being affected from a worst case perspective. And all of that ties into the way that an insurance policy would help. And once we understand in relation to that insurance policy to say, look, if this policy responds, how does it tie into our existing business practices from an incident response perspective? Are we ready to actually take this on? Does our business continuity management plan actually take into consideration things such as this policy, the sort of assistance we'll get from the insurance market? And that's when we start saying, look, do we have a usable plan? Do we have IT disaster recovery sites that take into consideration these cyber incidents? And that's basically the thinking. When we go to our clients, we don't want to look at just saying, look, we're selling you an insurance policy. We're selling you something that is going to, again, help your organization deal with digitalization in a manner which I think is better than our competitors. But ultimately, for the benefit of the organization, making sure that you are risk resilient going forward. So a lot of that stuff from a conceptual perspective seems quite nice, but also thinking about value, right? Because as South Africans, we need to make sure that our rand sort of goes as far as it can go. So I sort of like to look at this slide and say, do we understand the two avenues we could take? So we want to reduce the total cost of risk over a given period of time. Now, one of those ways is that we can sort of actively start doing that. So investing in the organization's information security structure so that we do actually reduce that total cost of risk, or do we want to say we'll offset that? We'll sort of offset the risk management aspect or the liability and say that's going to be handled by the cyber liability policy. But over time, what happens is that because we're starting to see more claims, the security controls that are in place aren't necessarily increasing in relation to the claims. So what'll happen over time is that you're going to have basically just paying more and more premiums year on year. So instead of that, we say, look, let's go in, spend some money in terms of understanding that risk, quantifying that risk. And then once we've done that, we can start looking and saying, look, these are the most important things. If we can reduce the costs associated to remediating the most important risks in our organization, we can essentially either save on limits or save on increasing deductibles. And what that means is that, the organization can fundamentally onboard more risk. And that's sort of the thinking that we need to start taking when it comes to this. It's a little bit, it's a little bit sophisticated for an insurance policy, and insurance tends to sort of sit on the wayside in terms of an executive committee's sort of key policies, right? But it's one of those things where I think, the very nature of the fact that cyber is a sphere where you're dealing with a much more sophisticated criminal actor. It needs to be addressed in the same manner. And this is just a slide in terms of our capabilities as Aon globally. So we've placed over 15.2 billion rand of cyber premium in 2019. We have managed 10 of the 30 largest breaches in history. We have over 600 dedicated cyber professionals, and that's generally just generally a slide about we are the best and the brightest, I suppose. So from that perspective, I think I am done. Thank you so much for listening to me. I hope it was not too much, it wasn't too verbose, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. And Little I will bring it back to you.
Zamani, thank you so much. Thanks for the insightful presentation. And I think some scary numbers, there's some $6 trillion that you spoke about. The market opportunity exists. And I appreciate the fact that you did not scare us only, but you shared some tips with us. And I think it ties nicely in, like you mentioned, with what Simon said earlier on. Please, Zamani, if you could respond to some of the Q&As on the Q&A button, should there be any questions for you. And to the audience, remember that InsureTalk 8 is happening on the 26th of November, and you can go on the CN&CO website to book your space there. Please make sure that you don't miss out, you earn those valuable CPD points. Next up is Charles Ackerman, CEO of Avis Risk. So he will talk to us about risk mitigation tool for business. Charles is currently the CEO of Avis Cybersecurity and assists organizations with strategic IT solution. Charles has more than 25 years of in-depth experience in the IT industry, specializing in banking, government, automotive, manufacturing, and the telecoms industry. Charles will share with us some of the risk mitigation tools for business. And again, I think this is very valuable for those guys that run and own their businesses, such as the brokers that have joined us today. Charles, please could you enlighten us and share with us those mitigation tools for business?
Thanks, Lito. Yeah, it's I'm gonna quickly share my screen with you, and then I will take it from there. Right, just want to cross check, and everyone, can you see? Good.
We're good, Charles.
All right, so thank you very much. Thanks for, it's really awesome to be part of this community, the insurance community. So my name is Charles Ackerman. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of AVS Cybersecurity. So I'm going to talk about cyber risk management and some practical mitigation tools. I could bore you with a lot of technical stuff and the real James Bond stuff that we often engage with when we handle incidents and so on. But I think I'm going to be a bit more practical in terms of what I think the insurance industry and brokers can actually go to market with in terms of how things have been sold. So I probably cannot do that just to also just throw a couple of numbers down. So on average, there's about 4 to 5 new viruses or malware, new pieces of viruses created every second of the day. So that's the extent in terms of the growth. And financial gain, it's all about financial gain. That's the only reason why we have cybercrime. Is about 85 million rand per second that has been lost to cybercrime globally. And I mean, cyber fraud and crime is bigger than total drug trafficking in the world, just to give you the extent of how much rands is involved or dollars is involved in it. The scary part is that it's become so easy. So a rental of hacking tools, malware to exploit targeted companies, or you can even buy a hitman. You can go and buy fraud as a service. The services is available on the dark web, and you can let people buy that or sell that to you. You're not even involved. So you can shield yourself almost from it. And then there was a couple of mentions made about social engineering tools, and that will keep on growing. I mean, if you look at social engineering from an email point of view, 92% of all attacks comes via normal emails. So the emails and the sectors and the vectors, how that's being handled. I think from a data record perspective, on a global basis, about 75 records every second. Those are the amount of records that are compromised at a global level. And then this was just some statistics from January to February or so. The same kind of trends are available today. So the amount, and this is in South Africa, the amount of infected computers in South Africa. And you can see the cyber criminals, they also take weekends. And that's why the dips goes off. So this is like during a weekend, it goes lower because computers are off, people are not working from home. And that trend obviously now is just accelerating. So what are the external factors? And I think the most advanced threat use basic vulnerabilities and human factor. So people just simply don't update their patches. They just simply work when they get those Tuesday patches on Microsoft and then Adobe and so on. They tend not to use it because it consumes their data, or it makes the machine slower for that period of time. It's a bit of a nuisance. The reality is that manufacturers of software have identified weaknesses in their software, and they are actually trying to help us by providing us with patches into those environments. So it is critical that these patches are done. People don't update patches. We've had a case the other day, a major organization had a cyber breach. Their patch management, 8 months old. And it's not uncommon. You can go and find it in every organization. Those kind of things will be happening. And we're not talking here of general stupid patches for Word or something. I'm talking of critical security patches, which people are not simply not doing. And then as long as you have people working on IT, those people are the vulnerabilities. So it's the human factor. And Simon also touched onto the training component and why that behavior change is such a critical thing. I've mentioned the availability and lowering of prices of cybercrime as a service. So you don't have to be a cyber fundi to get to be involved there. You can go and rent these people. They are available in the market. And then obviously one of the biggest challenges that large corporations have is that the cyber criminals know that large corporations have got a lot of layers of protection. They've got firewalls and they've got data loss prevention and antivirus solutions and all these kind of things, is that they will actually use their smaller suppliers. So think about, you know, when we look at using smaller suppliers in order to give us better ratings from a BE point of view or from a supplier development point of view or so. And those are the areas which the cyber criminals use. They would attack those smaller companies in order to infiltrate into the large organizations. I want to give you a practical example. If the people that bring you water and deliver water when we're still in the offices and as we're starting to get back to offices, how do you know that waterman that's delivering your water does not have a flash disk and he's just quickly pressing it up into a computer up at the CEO's office where he has to leave the water bottle. So simple things like that needs to be, people need to be aware of that. It's not just the sophisticated stuff. It could be very, very simple in order to do it. Internal factors. I think the growing sophistication and the visibility gap, because I'll touch onto the visibility just now, but because things are going into the cloud and people think cloud is everything, cloud isn't everything. Cloud is a mechanism of provisioning information and provisioning applications and data centers to companies. Cloud, can I categorically tell you, cloud is more dangerous than on-premises solutions. Because think about it. If I have to access your service and they're on premises, I have to get past the alarm system. I have to maybe get past the guards. I have to get past the biometric controls. I have to get into your server room. Someone may see me because of the CCTV, and eventually I can sort of plug into your computer. If that server sits in the cloud, all I need is a very weak username and password, and maybe with no two-factor authentication and things like that in place. So you are significantly more exposed by putting things into the cloud and not following a methodology to protect those cloud environments. So because we've got all these hybrid environments, it's making it operationally more difficult for IT guys. And then the scary part, it takes about 214 days for a targeted attack. I'm not talking here just a normal attack, for someone to profile your organization, for code that's been downloaded on that computer, for information that's then been exploited, and then a real aggressive targeted attack taking from there, where they bring all your systems down with ransomware. 214 days for the average targeted attack to be identified. So that's how long they are already in your environment. So taking you to that FBI statement, or the guy from the FBI, two types of companies, those that are compromised and those that don't know that they've been compromised. So it's quite important that one is aware that we can never let our guards down. And then working from home. In the past, people thought working in their office environment, they've got their firewalls and they protect it. It's been way overstated for many, many years already, because you can literally Bluetooth your smartphone into your laptop and still be connected onto the corporate network. So how good is your firewall now? Because you're just simply bypassing it with your smartphone. So obviously you need to configure it that doesn't happen. But now that people are working from home, even more so. And let me maybe just give you a quick example there. We had one of our clients. They traditionally worked on the MRI machines for hospitals, so the CAT scan machines and all those kind of things, and they would remotely service them, no problem. They work from their corporate office, they sit behind the firewalls, they've got a virtual private network, which is literally just the encryption between the user on the computer this side right up to the hospital. Everything is fine. So he works from home, still has the VPN, still have his antivirus updated, but one difference. His network at home was compromised, maybe because the kids went into websites and it downloaded, and their little router that they use for the internet was compromised. They brought the whole hospital down. All those CAT scan machines, MRIs, they were all broken for a while. So you're talking about Industry 4, IoT devices and so on. And the missing link in this case was their local network that they used at home was not adequately protected with the same kind of level that they actually had at the office. And that's the problem from working from home. So for executives, any one of the executives working from home, I highly recommend that you have a fully managed firewall implementation that's been managed by a corporate IT network. You can't rely on your local Huawei router and things like that. So some trends that has happened during 2020, and obviously the cyber skills gap. It's a global phenomenon. It's not just in South Africa. Everywhere in the world, there's the gap in cyber skills are just keep on growing. I already mentioned the cloud misconfiguration will be growing risk to confidentiality of data, because Microsoft, Amazon, all these guys, they would say, we will give you a guarantee that your server that you are hosting with us will be safe, because no one will be able to get to it. No one will be able to do all sorts of funny things, but they do not give you, they give you a zero guarantee that your data is safe. That still is your responsibility in terms of how you protect the data, because it's all to do with identity and access control. So who's allowed on the data? And once they have access to the data, what can they do with it? Can they download it? Can they put it onto a USB? Whatever the case may be. And then obviously cyber incident response. I'll touch a bit onto that as well. So you need to work more with predictive models. You can't just respond to something once the pawpaw eats the fan. That's not going to work, because then you are already compromised. So you want leading indicators of compromise. Now, how do you do that? You can't have all these hundreds of screens and have a very nice control center where you're monitoring things from, and then believe because everything is being monitored, you will pick it up. No, you won't. You need to make use of things like machine learning to create you that kind of predictive model in terms of protecting your information. And then social engineering, I mentioned that, it will just keep on being pushed. And data itself will become the security perimeter. So in the past, we thought, well, to protect my servers and to have the access control and the fire detection and everything and so on, that is how I'm going to protect my information and mitigate risk. The reality is, it is not about the hardware. It's not about the data center. It's all about the data. It is only about the data. Nothing else matters. So the approach that one needs to take is, how do you protect your data? And there's many ways to skin a cat. As I say, either cloud, on-premises, hybrid of the two, but it's all about your data. And then there's a big shift from a business for businesses to take a more of a business risk-driven cybersecurity approach. So where you see what are the business risks and how cyber fits into that and assisting the organization. So then comes the question, so why are we cyber criminals? Why are we being phished? And I personally think, yeah, this for me is the core of it, is when we do physical insurance, it's things that we can see. We can relate to it, we can add value to it. But when it comes to technologies, you can't hear it, you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, you can't touch it. And so for the average user, it is this very fuzzy concept. And that's why people are pulled into phishing attacks. And that's why people don't quite realize what their business risk is, because they only see cyber when they've got the computer on and they can see it on the screen. But everything else that happens behind that, they cannot see. And because we cannot see it and smell and hear it and so on, it makes it for us difficult to comprehend and get our minds around. And this is, I think, the biggest problem why cyber insurance is not taken off as fast as it could have been, because of this concept. When the average broker speaks to a client, it's very difficult for an average broker to articulate that concept into a client, and it's actually not difficult. We've got a couple of tools that we can assist you with, how to sort of just drive that message across. And the rest of my presentation will also help you in that regard. So what now? How do we evolve from being a victim to taking ownership? So how do we become owners and not victims? You need to manage it. You need to manage cyber risk. It's not going to happen by itself. It's not miraculously going to go away. We have to manage it. So you almost want to create a managed predictability approach. So we live in this very unpredictable world, which is so fast changing and so many things that we have to think about. But you have to manage it. And that obviously starts with leadership. It starts right at the top. It's not the IT manager's responsibility. It is the board's responsibility to give that direction in terms of where you need to go from a cyber risk perspective. So here's a couple of approaches. If you just look at risk management per se, is you can either minimize it. So you take an approach, you assess it, you see what risks you can eliminate and say, okay, no one can come onto our network if they don't at least have a proper antivirus. I will call it antivirus for simplicity, but we call it endpoint protection, but antivirus in place. So that's like minimizing risk. You look at things that you can do that can minimize the amount of risk exposure you have. And then you can say, well, there are certain risks and we're just simply going to accept it. The fact that people are working from home, the fact that they may have routers, they don't all have firewalls in place, but they may have routers that are not maybe properly configured and could be compromised. We accept that, but let's at least just see how we can control that in the best possible way. Very, very difficult. I think Simon also mentioned I can spend R1 billion now on cyber security products, and you've got the human factor. You cannot eliminate all risk. You can literally, to give you an example, of course, you can eliminate the risk at a shopping center that there's no one that's going to break in or steal a handbag or snatch anyone. What do? You just close the doors of the shopping center, no one can come in. This is the objective. So you can't eliminate a cyber risk. We are more and more, as we have smartphones and all these working from home and so on, it's just going to increase. So you can't eliminate it. And then the fourth quadrant, this is where cyber risk policies comes in. You transfer organizations or individual companies transfer some of that risk. And this is why they would take out a cyber insurance policy. It is transferring risk. That's what cyber policies are about, nothing more than that. And then the goals to basic information security is, you cannot build it around a system. You really have to entrench it, and it needs to be integrated into your DNA, into your fabric of how the organization is managed and how it's controlled. It needs to be integrated into your systems. And then there's obviously three main objectives. The one is the confidentiality of your data. And obviously now with Poppy and the breaches and everything and so on that's coming through, the integrity of that data, making sure it's not, it is correct, it is accurate, it's to the point, it's not a whole lot of garbage. So you want to ensure that the integrity of your data is very good. And then the availability. It needs to be available always, not sometimes, but it always needs to be available or whenever you require it. So interesting enough, we call this the CIA principle: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But these are the core three objectives when you look at managing cyber risk. And this is really the enterprise objectives, is they want to make sure that they're probably being protected. Yeah, and then something like managing risk, it's a process. I must put it there, not even instant coffee is instant. It went through a very long process to become instant, but it wasn't instant to start off with. So it is a process. And there's a couple of steps that you have to look at. And this is, I think, where there's some practical points that's going to come out of this, is you need to look at technology in conjunction with the people that works with the technology, in conjunction with the business processes that are being deployed in the organization, and then also culture. And we all know culture is driven from the top. So in order to create a lean IT risk, cyber risk process, you have to always start with assessment. There's no quick hit. It's like a lot of IT companies will approach a client and say, we've got this technology and it can do this and it can do this and so on. And you're like, the sales guy is like really good. And you say, yes, I would like 2 of those. Thank you. The point is you have to know where you are and what your risk is first before you go to the next step. And that is the IT strategy. Now, what's important here is that the IT strategy must be aligned to the business strategy. So it's not IT strategy first, then business strategy. It's business strategy, and IT strategy needs to be aligned, because that is the only way how you can create an efficient IT infrastructure. As a matter of fact, the only way how you can create sustainability from a technology perspective is that you need to get that alignment right. And then from there, for the first time, you start looking at remediation. When you start looking at the different kinds of services and products, whether it is a Kaspersky or an ESET or a backup solution or Amazon or whatever. That's the first time when you start looking at what are the different tool sets that you would require and services that you would require in order to help you to meet these objectives. The fourth stage is training and awareness. What we often find is that we would design a technology solution for a client. So we would architect it. We would then implement it because that's what the client wanted it, and it met the statement of work in terms of what they wanted to execute. But the internal people and the business processes just don't understand the technology. So when it comes to cyber risk, I believe training awareness is as important as making backups of your data. If you can have all the backups of the data. As a matter of fact, the client that we, again, handled a few weeks ago, not only were their core systems ransomed, even their backups were ransomed. And I'm not going to go into detail of how it happened, but the point is the cyber awareness training is as fundamental as your backups and your security solutions that you're using in the organization. And then the fifth element is monitoring. So you almost, just like you have a car, you've got a fuel gauge, you've got maybe an oil temp or a temperature gauge. Why do you have those? Because you want to see if something is going to happen. You can already start seeing in the lights that are coming on your dashboard. You need the same kind of dashboard in your organization for two reasons. One is to make sure that you get maximum return on investment. So whoever sold you what, doesn't matter whether it's the CIO or a vendor that sold you this technology. If you don't monitor it to look at the performance that it meets the objectives that you set it out to be, how would you know that you've made a good investment? So your ROI and your predictiveness has to start with a monitoring feature. And not just monitoring everything and having hundreds of dashboards, but creating predictive monitoring that you can pick up those indicators of compromise quite early. And then the last one is incident response. So every one of us, I can promise you this, every one of us on this webinar will have an incident at some stage. It's just a question of how big that incident is going to be. So the better you are prepared and the better systems and so on and architecture you have, the better risk management approach you take will define what your losses is going to be in this point. So what is the first starting point? It all starts with an assessment. You cannot implement technology. You cannot manage risk if you don't know where you are. If I'm here and I want to get to Cape Town, at least I know I'm here, and what do I have? I've got a car, I'm fully fueled, and I've got some cash or a car to put extra fuel in towards Cape Town. But I want to be there in 3 hours. Well, you can have the fastest car in the world. You're not going to probably get there in 2 or 3 hours. I probably need an aeroplane then. So understand what your enterprise objectives are, and then start off with an assessment. And what we typically do in enterprises is we do an ISO 27001 assessment. It's a global standard, and it literally looks at 114 controls. These are the elements that it's made up of. So the first point is do a proper assessment so that you can know and have visibility of where your weaknesses currently are. Because once you have visibility of where they are, and there could be many, it's okay. But at least you know where you start, and you at least can work a plan to see how we're going to mitigate this over the long run. The second thing is, and this is a very old standard from Gartner, is you don't want to operate continuously here in a reactive firefighting mode. We call those the level zeros because they are a bit on the level zeros. You need to be a bit more proactive, and ultimately, if you can get to what we call level 2 or level 3, you are much your overall cost for IT and your overall cost of doing business to your clients, operationally wise, guaranteed your overall operating cost will be lower, and you will be globally competitive if you can get to a level 3, level 4 sort of scenario. So create a plan. There's this old saying is like, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So at least create a plan, because that will help you to be smart in terms of the technology and the processes and the structure of your organization that you want to follow through. And then the first step is then remediation. And as I mentioned, this is where the different technology and so on comes in. It doesn't matter what technology it is, but eliminate overlapping and complex technology. We see this all the time, that organizations implement all this technology, and when as mentioned earlier, when the sales guy got there, this is just short of making coffee for you as well. So there's people often implement certain technologies to cover a specific problem, but they don't have a holistic view, and they spend a lot of money on technology by implementing little point products, but they don't look at the bigger picture. So eliminate overlapping. Now in COVID, we really need to look at our cash and how we manage our cash by eliminating some of those technologies, and just simply configuring what you have better will actually help you to drive operational costs down, IT costs for that matter, at the same time reduce your risk, and at the same time create better custom experiences, just because both internal and external, purely because you actually had a careful look at how this technology fits together. So it's not having all sorts of puzzles and licorice all sorts in place. It is seeing where everything fits. It takes time and it takes mental energy to do that. And then you optimize your existing technology. It's no use having a Porsche and doing 50 kilometers per hour with it. You've got a Porsche where you can drive on an autobahn, like in Germany, or on a certain track. I mean, you can do your 200, but you cannot, most people have technology. They pay the price of a Porsche for it, and they are only driving at 50 kilometers per hour on the highway. So optimize the technology that you have. And then obviously fit for purpose. If you're not a bank, you're a panel beater. You don't need a panel beater doesn't need the same level of security, IT security that a bank has, because their risk exposure is different, their risk profile is different. So find fit for purpose technology, what you deploy, and then take a phased approach. I mean, first things first. It's literally, of course, we want to do everything yesterday, but don't do that to yourself. It's going to cost you excessive amount of money, and you can't change the behavior of people internally that fast as well. You need to take the team with you as you move along. So take it in a phased approach. Take a 3-year view in terms of how you want to harden your cyber environment. Don't try and do everything at once. And then again, in-source versus outsource. Cybersecurity has become a very highly specialized field, and get the right guys involved to just assist you with the technology. Whether you in-source or outsource, it's neither here or there. It all depends on your appetite for risk and the amount of money that you want to spend on non-core functions. So look at what you want to in-source and what you want to outsource. And as I mentioned, the monitoring is as critical. So the reporting to ensure ROI and risk minimization. You're not implementing antivirus. It's a grudge buy to buy endpoint protection. It's a grudge buy to buy a firewall and do all these things. It's just like I cannot work properly because I've got IT blocking me here and there and everywhere. So take a risk minimization approach and be pragmatic about it. Pragmatic. Quite honestly, don't let IT run the show. Let business run the show and tell IT how you want it. The board needs to do that, no one else. And then step 4 is training and awareness. First seek to understand, then seek to be understood. That's what I often tell our own staff is, as IT professionals, we continuously learn, etc., etc. How do we make it practical for the average user? The average user can actually not care. As long as their screen is there and they can do their work, they are quite comfortable, but it's changed a bit. And again, this is a senior management role on topics like how do you handle emails, how do you handle web browsing, how do you handle passwords and social networks. I mean, if any organization out there, for instance, does not have a policy where if I log into Facebook, you are not allowed to use your company email address for that. How many companies have that policy in place? So distance your social networks from your organization networks. I mean, in IT terms, our administrators, for instance, have different username and passwords than they have as normal users, even within our own network. So you want to break those things apart. So let social networks and social networking be separate. PC security, mobile device management, the confidentiality of data, personal data, says GDPR, but Poppy, a dangerous girl. And then social engineering, as I mentioned earlier, and then security at home and during travel. So these are all kinds of topics, I believe, that are critical, that as an organization, you need to get the message through. Otherwise, you will be a cyber victim. Very simple. Step 5, monitoring. So use the right kind of ingestion of different kinds of data sets. So take your firewall data, take your antivirus data, take your Active Directory data, whether it sits in Azure or whether it sits on premises. Bring all that data together. And then start creating predictive models in terms of what we call indicators of compromise, that I've potentially got some risks here. Create as much as possible automation and orchestration. Because again, you can have 10 dashboards in front of you, guaranteed you will not pick up. Because I could have a very small compromise on my antivirus, it's below the radar screen. It's like, well, guys, no problem here, I'm going to focus on the top 10. The same scenario is I'm going to focus on the top 10 issues on my firewall. I'm going to focus on the top 10 issues on my Active Directory. The reality is, if you take that small compromise on the antivirus, plus the firewall, plus the Active Directory, if you take those three things to combine, you actually have a major problem. Because remember, the cyber criminals don't want to be detected. They want to fly under the radar screen. Hence why you need to bring these data sets together to create you that orchestration. And machines, humankind cannot crunch numbers as fast as PCs, computers can do. That's why we've got computers. So, and that's what we call orchestrate. So create a lot of automation or orchestration by using computers to do that, where they've got the machine learning and so on. And then you create your recommendations from there, you create your investigation points from there, collaborate, and then you manage your cases and report back. So ultimately reporting back into the board to say, guys, this is what we've seen, this is what we have, this is how we've managed it, we've picked up these indicators of compromise, this is how we handle it, etc., etc. So go through those components through your next generation security operations center. So it's think about this the same way as you have an alarm at home. So you've got the alarm. How do you know it's not a false alarm? So you've got your CCTV components, you've got the movement of people coming in and out of the house, smart watches, IoT things and so on. You want to bring all that data together so that you can pick up when you really have risk. And that's is where that comes in. This is typically an example from a monitoring from our SOC that we have. So it creates a visualization of how all the zeros and ones moves in and outside of the organization, through the firewall, wherever they connect, anywhere in the world. Even if anyone connects into a bad IP address or a bad website and things like that, these blue things in here, they will simply start turning red. And within that, we've got orchestration, automated orchestration. So it automatically, when it picks up these kind of behaviors, it will actually start, it will stop that connection between that external website and that individual's computer, because that behavior is abnormal. So again, create orchestration. People cannot do this as fast as machines can do it. But people have to use that information in order to think, what are the ways we can do? I once heard an expression, and they said any manager that does not use machine learning, or let's put it, machine learning or computers will not take away jobs of people, because people will change their job profiles. But it won't take away the jobs of managers. But managers that does not use computers or machine learning to do their jobs better will be out of a job. So the whole point is, use technology at hand. Don't see it as a threat. Don't see it as it's going to take our jobs. See it as an opportunity in terms of how it can make your job easier and better protected. So create that visualization. And this is sort of like one of the tools that we're using. And then the sixth point is all about incident response. So take a structured approach in terms of how you handle incident response. These standards, ladies and gentlemen, they are available on the internet. You can go and find them there. It's called the SANS Guidelines and Standards. It's a default methodology that is being used. You can take the methodology, but what sits behind the methodology, it's all about the right kind of expertise and people. So it's a people-driven business that can use these kind of methodologies and the different kinds of James Bond tools to help you to manage those incidents. And then the cost of trust. Yeah, 77% of organizations have no cyber incident response plan. That is scary. So it's almost like not having any form of evacuation plan, not having any plan B if they are compromised. And what I can say is that 50% of high-performing organizations do have a cyber incident response plan in place, and they've got it deployed throughout the organization, because they look at the people, they look at the processes, they look at the technology, they look at the organization culture, and how they bring that together. And they, on average, spend about 50% less on cyber incidents. So from a cyber payout perspective, a cyber insurance point of view, a cyber incident response plan is, I believe, is fundamental if you want to lower risk and lower cost. And if you can lower cost, you can possibly see how you're going to handle premiums as well. But a cyber incident response plan is fundamental to actually drive cyber incident costs down further. And then, as mentioned, it is just a matter of when and how extensive you'll be going to be compromised. And these are the costs associated to it. The direct costs, the indirect costs, and the opportunity costs. Now, whether you call it reputational damage, whether you call it that we can't access our systems and we're losing productivity, whether it's the cost of our guys hiring in experts to come and assist us with this ransom scenario, whatever the case may be, those are the costs. Here's just one slide that was done by Panamon. It's actually IBM company, and they specifically had the research in South Africa as well. And I haven't seen the 2019 numbers yet. They'll probably do it in 2020 again, but the average cost of a breach is about $2.9 million times 20, times 16, or whatever the exchange rate is. That's the average cost of a breach. And I've just mentioned to you, what is that cost? It's direct, indirect, and opportunity costs. So the average cost of a record is about $142, 300 Rand. The average time to identify a breach, 142, 150 days, however you slice it. And the average time to contain a breach, 40 days. To really get everything back under control and everything running smoothly again. After a breach has been identified. This includes your PR, it includes your legal, it includes everything else. So take that productivity that is just being lost by senior executives, chairmen of organizations, secretaries of organizations, the risk management people that they could not have spent on proactive stuff, but they actually had to spend on chasing the tails because they were breached. And then this is the one that I often show to the brokers, which and this is sort of like a slide that you can use to actually sell cyber insurance in an easier way without having to explain it. Is we want to take selling cyber insurance the same methodology and thinking pattern than we would sell normal business insurance and house insurance and whatever the case may be, but you shouldn't. Don't look at it that way, because what's the value of your data? Remember, data is not on your balance sheet. So if it was in your balance sheet, it was a different story, but it's not, because that's not how financial accounting works. So we've been operated like that for years, in terms of that the data is not on your balance sheet. So the only thing that you can hold on to in terms of how big should your cyber cover be is that for enterprise, it's about 40 million Rand. A mid-sized organization, it's going to cost you about 16 million Rand, and for SMB about R1 million. So that's your parameter, I think, that you can use to write cyber policies. And then critical is, how do you establish the cyber risk index of a client? This is something that we've created and tailored, and it's to identify the cyber exposure that your client may have. And this will touch on to basic things. Do they have a policy, for instance, to identify how they're going to, a cybersecurity policy? No, they don't. Well, if they don't even have a plan from the board, how can you expect them to sort of manage cyber risk? So that's one question, for instance. And then the endpoint protection. Do they have proper antivirus in place? Not free versions of antivirus, because free versions of antivirus are written by cyber criminals. So if you've downloaded those free versions of cyber antivirus on any of your machines or your phones and so on, eliminate them and delete them as quick as you possibly can. And if you even do internet banking through those mobile devices and you've got the free download, I'm just saying good luck, because you will be compromised in a big way. And so identify the risk exposure. Do they have the backups? Do they have a business continuity plan? So it really looks at the maturity of the organization in terms of how they approach it, starting from the top. It's a cultural thing. It's not just tick boxes in place. And most often when you look at your cyber policy, people want to just have these tick boxes to say these are the minimum requirements. Look beyond that. And I think, again, here, if you need any assistance by SHA, I'm more than happy to assist any of you in helping you out with that process. And then what are the standard things you need in place to be protected against cyber risk is the things that you want to ask. And then obviously the one thing I touched on to was, what's the value of trust? Because if you are cyber compromised, that trust, do any one of us now really trust Experian or any of the other ones that have been compromised? We will always have this in our back mind to say, yeah, I just wonder, is my data safe? It's like, have these guys got my back? And so that value of trust is huge. And that is a long lasting, not just a 40-day process. It could be years for you to be trusted again, or a competitor taking over your part of the business. And then what is the cost of a cyber incident versus the preventative cost? Weigh that up. Don't be led just by technology vendors to say, put this technology in. This is sort of like my closing part of it. To say, throw this technology in, do this. Start with governance. Start with governance. Don't throw in technology and think that technology is going to take it away. Technology is one of the tools, just like your internal business processes are, and the people elements and your organization culture is to create a very lean overall approach in terms of managing risk from a cyber perspective. It's not an island on its own. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. I will answer any questions if someone was to ask. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. Much appreciated. Very insightful and detailed presentation there. And we appreciate the tools and the approaches and the trends that you shared with us. And a lovely quote, not even instant coffee is instant. And now to our last speaker of today, brought to you by Genesis, to help us understand and make sense of the new era of cybersecurity after COVID-19. Please welcome Matthew Garden from Garden Group. Matthew, take it away, my brother.
Thank you, and good afternoon all. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm just going to share my slides now. I think it's an extremely exciting frontier to be involved in cyber risk, and it's a very exciting place to be. So today I'm just going to be touching on certain trends, macro trends, challenges and possible solutions to cyber risk in the years to come, kind of post-COVID, the post-COVID era. I think COVID-19 has sped up certain trends that were already pre-existing before the pandemic. And I think only now awareness is beginning, especially in the SMME community, to really kind of start tackling cyber risk and putting in these mitigating measures, such as insurance policies, security technology, policies and procedures. Today, I really just implore all of you on the call to really start engaging with the scary, sometimes anxiety-inducing nature of cyber risk. I think the more of us are thinking about this deeply, the better for our industry and the better for the business communities we try and serve and protect. So to start off, I think it's been a buzzword. I'm just going to touch on some trends. A buzzword this year has been remote working. So it's been happening since the pandemic. Public spaces are deemed to be relatively kind of dangerous or risky places to be. Therefore, lots of organizations have sent employees to work from home, and large organizations in the world are actually not renewing their leases. So in my view, this creates a cyber incident in that lots of companies are going to be monitoring employees, invasive monitoring of employee behavior to ensure they are productive at home. I think this could pose a risk, maybe not now, but in the future, when stockpiling very sensitive kind of behavioral data of staff members. If this can get into the wrong hands, it could be used for nefarious means. So I think it's just something to be aware of. Also, the undeniable importance of going digital. I think the whole conception that certain businesses are tech businesses and others are traditional businesses is a thing of the past. I think we really need to change our mindsets in that. I think traditional businesses are technology businesses. We all use technology to operate. We are all tech businesses, even if you use an email, internet, and a basic CRM system. We are all digitized, and technology is a fundamental part of our lives going forward. I think the adoption of cloud computing has been happening for years. I think from a cyber perspective, we're seeing that what type of risk that may bring. I think a very interesting risk from a cloud perspective is cryptojacking. And because businesses are going into the cloud and they're kind of hiring infrastructure, being servers as a service, and they're kind of paying the amount of kind of usage you go, I think cyber criminals are going to be looking to kind of get on that cloud bandwidth and start utilizing the cloud infrastructure to either mine Bitcoin or mine any cryptocurrency. And you could see kind of your monthly costs go from the thousands to the hundreds of thousands of dollars or rands. Next, I'm going to touch on businesses focusing on efficiency and resilience. I think post such a shock like COVID, I think businesses are really going to be looking to automate as many manual processes as possible. We're going to see that kind of hopefully the machines are going to allow the rest of our staff members to pivot and spend more time being human and involved in the customer experience of all our clientele. We have seen in Europe and the US quite harsh data legislation coming through. We've seen, especially under GDPR, we've seen some big fines and penalties doled out to some massive organizations like British Airways. In South Africa, it seems like POPI is going to be coming in July 2021. I believe that the regulator is going to look to dole out and make example of certain companies that have been negligent, and I think the responsible officers are going to be held kind of legally liable or responsible for those losses. And it just puts an extra pressure on the South African kind of specifically SME base who maybe never had the resources previously to start taking cyber seriously, putting the controls in place and really kind of look after their risk. So I think there's the understanding amongst enterprise level, but SMEs, I think there's a slow filtering down in South Africa that businesses now realize that they can be crippled by a cyber incident. It's not just your kind of high risk kind of industries like your medical profession, financial services, professional services. I think all businesses from plumbers to kind of manufacturers can all be taken down by a cyber incident. I think it's slowly filtering down into our psyches that this is a risk that is, as the Allianz Risk Barometer showed at the beginning of the year, that this is a risk that is the biggest business risk globally. So I think it's slowly coming down in South Africa that business owners and MDs and decision makers are realizing, guys, we need to actually look after our risk here. So I think another very interesting trend that I am particularly interested in is virtual companionship. So we see quite a lot of manufacturers of AI robots in the US, parts of Asia and Europe, actually kind of creating these AI robots. And we've seen the first case in the US where a man wants to actually marry his AI, which I think is going to be quite interesting. I think we probably all have to acknowledge on this call that we're kind of partially married or at least engaged to our cell phones. So maybe it's not such a big step after all. But virtual companionship, can you imagine the data that a virtual companion AI can have on someone, kind of you telling them your deepest, darkest secrets, and where is that data stored? What can be done with that data? I think it's an absolutely fascinating trend that we need to watch. Mental anguish. So this year has been a tough year. I think it's been one of the most noteworthy years kind of in living memory. Uncertainty is palpable. No one really knows what's happened next. Very little visibility. Recently in The Economist, since February 2020, almost 500 million full-time jobs have been wiped off the global map. I think this is quite a scary figure due to the pandemic. This kind of will bring more inequality, more social unrest, especially in South Africa, where that was kind of pre-existing the pandemic. But I think together that matched with kind of a growing kind of social media addiction, which has now been scientifically proven to be linked to kind of anxiety and depression disorders, will kind of leave people more vulnerable and mentally unwell. And it can be suggested that people that are mentally unwell will it'll be kind of a bit easier to kind of dupe them into clicking on a link or attachment. So it's something to be aware of, that people are feeling emotionally fragile and vulnerable. Expanding data collections. So businesses, it is indisputable that businesses now, the business that wins is the business that use data to the best of their ability. I think data monetization, making business decisions based on data in your business, has become an imperative. And I think lots of businesses are going to be stockpiling more and more data to make more accurate decisions using the AIs or whatever kind of reporting deployment they have in their business. I think it's quite an interesting trend. And I think lots of businesses have been doing this for years and have seen the value in it, but it's going to create even more risk in terms of how much data are we going to be holding as businesses in the years to come. Biotechnology is another fascinating trend. So biotechnology, imagine a day where heart pacemakers are going to be held ransom. I think it's not as far away as we may think. I think biotechnology is maybe going to be even sped up post a COVID health crisis. So it's just something to watch out for. Driverless vehicles, also think not so far ahead of us. We're going to have fleets of driverless vehicles on our road, accompanied by maybe a human in the passenger seat. I think we could potentially see on the cyber side some remote hijackings of vehicles being sent to incorrect locations, or even remote kidnapping of personal vehicles. I think anything that has a computer is hackable. The Internet of Things. So I think the interconnectedness of devices is going to pose more vectors of attack for those wanting to gain entry. With our smart fridges connected to our smartphones, connected to our smart security cameras, connected to our lights, connected to our smartwatches, it's going to pose a hell of a lot of vectors of attack that we really need to be wary of and open our minds to and free our minds to really think of a future where this is actually possible. Next, I'm going to touch on some challenges that we are facing, specifically more targeted to general challenges and SME related. So I think it's all known that no one is fallible. There's no silver bullet for cyber risk. No matter what kind of procedures or policies you put in place, measures as a business, as I think Charles said earlier, you can spend R1 billion in cybersecurity, but you can still have a disgruntled staff member who could kind of put a piece of malware in a very kind of fragile part of your business and deploy it at the correct time. So I think the dynamic nature of cyber risk needs a different approach of how we're thinking about risk, especially in the insurance industry. I think traditional insurance, we kind of underwrite on a proposal form on day one. I think the dynamic nature of cyber risk will need a different way of monitoring risk, which I think is going to be very interesting how it plays out and how we're going to see innovation playing out in the insurance space. I've seen that there is a few very innovative insurers in the US who are actually attaching security technology alongside a policy. So I think a big issue that I'm seeing now is that insurers have limited sight of risk. So if insurers have limited sight of risk, I think that is a major issue, and I'm sure it's leaving lots of insurers and reinsurers on edge as to what am I actually insuring. So I think that, and that as I said to you earlier, there is a limitation of proposal forms. We need a type of constant monitoring of risk. I think especially in the South African SME community, I think there tends to be a low level of cyber awareness, and it's quite difficult kind of engaging with clients when they don't really understand what the consequences are. So I think the denial of risk, saying, no, this is never going to happen to me, is something that needs to be forgotten, and everyone is vulnerable. And this is a risk that is just going to snowball as more technologies come into the world. So the COVID-19 economic catastrophe is going to put another spanner in the works, in my view, is into how businesses are going to be kind of looking after their cyber risk. I think businesses that are struggling to stay afloat now cannot justify more expense. Even though a cyber instance would probably take them over the edge, I think businesses are going to find it quite difficult to put more budget away for cyber spend. It's a very difficult economic time, and businesses are going to have a tough time doing it. I think the South African broker community, which is kind of average age is quite high, seems to have a difficulty grasping the risk. As Zamani said earlier, it is an intangible risk, and we kind of need to kind of open our minds a bit as to how that plays out. Based on the complexity of cyber, we as a broker community really need to kind of start understanding IT architecture, what data risk looks like, how data is stored, and what industries we're in. And we really need to go get on top of that as being kind of predominant risk advisors in the space. IT managers, especially in the SME space, IT managers are not security experts. And I think often MDs or CEOs of kind of SME, large commercial businesses rely on IT managers for advice. And often there seems to be a bit of a conflict of interest there when IT managers are always going to tell their boss that everything's okay and always going to say that I'm doing a great job. So I think it's quite a difficult hurdle to get over, and it's a challenge to say what is a good job and who is an expert and how can we provide the business community with really quality advice. I think human error is something that is very difficult. I think, as we've all touched on earlier, disgruntled or malicious staff members can pose a huge risk. Anyone kind of clicking on a link, an attachment, plugging in a USB found in a parking lot into your computer, that is often how cyber attacks are born. Next, I think the increasing sophistication of attacks. I think ransomware attacks are increasing in sophistication. They are being deployed at kind of the correct times to kind of really create the most damage. We're also seeing that kind of government-funded attacks, like North Korea, for instance, are actually kind of government funding attackers to actually raise money for their nuclear ballistic program or something like that. So we've got a whole range of different cyber criminals at play here, some more funded than others, some more targeted, some more indiscriminate. So it's just something to really note about the challenges that we may face. So next, lastly, I'm going to touch on the solutions that I believe we need to start really thinking about as an industry. So a holistic approach to cyber. So in my view, we need to really look at cyber risk holistically. It's not about just transferring risk to the insurer, but it's about trying to really manage risk with the policyholder. If that means, I believe there's going to be innovation, there needs to be innovation, and eventually a cyber policy should be sold with security technology as a must-have with it. If it's monitoring, if it's awareness training, businesses should really get that technology with the policy. One, to ensure that insurers get clear line of sight of what they're actually insuring, and two, that we actually ensure that kind of the people we are insuring have really good security posture. Next, I think a whole concept, and especially could be driven by insurers and brokers, is how do we reward businesses who are more cyber resilient? I think businesses should be incentivized to really tackle their own risk and really look after their own risk. If that means kind of getting a discount, better terms and conditions on their policy, or getting a premium discount, I think businesses should really be incentivized to do that. And the lower risk we have as an insurance industry, the more sustainable this product's going to be in the future. At the moment, as Simon said earlier, we have a massive accumulation of risk. And how do we actually mitigate that going into the future, into the 5, 10, 20 years ahead? I think the broker's extremely important in the cyber value chain. I think the broker sits between the customer, the insurer and reinsurer. And I think the broker has a very important role to play in giving the insurer line of sight. What are we insuring? And can you rectify certain things? And providing the customer with really high quality cyber advice with regards to the policy and maybe kind of other mitigation measures. I think it's important more than ever to form strategic relationships with key kind of value adders in the cyber space. If that means cybersecurity firms, PR companies, etc., but we really need to be offering huge value to the end customer and really make this product sustainable, as I said earlier. I think cyber risk insurance or cyber liability insurance, as it originally came about, should not be seen as an insurance policy, but more a risk management tool. The whole incident management response kind of component of a policy should really be seen as the core value of a policy. And this is to really mitigate loss upon kind of notification of an incident. But I think we need to wrap our head around cyber is very different to a building policy or a kind of motor policy where you're transferring most of the risk to the insurer. I think we need to take control of the risk as brokers and clients and really kind of incentivize our customers to really go for it and look after their risk. Lastly, I think one of the solutions, I believe, to the cyber crisis we are going through, and it's just going to kind of skyball, is visionary thinking. I think we need to open our mind and really think about a future where there is more biotechnology and there is kind of driverless vehicles and kind of virtual companions. I think it's very important that we start kind of really opening our minds to what is possible. And I think what I was actually kind of a bit gobsmacked with, I think I was a bit young, but in the first smartphone came out in 2007. That was 13 years ago. So what does the next 13 years look like for us? And how will it skyball and change cyber risk? Lastly, I would just like to end off with a quote by Stephen Hawking, which I think is a kind of very impressive human being who has changed his space. And yeah, so Stephen Hawking said, the greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, but is the illusion of knowledge. So in my view, I think let's continue learning, let's continue challenge ourselves, let's continue brainstorming how we can solve this major issue and work together to do that. Thanks a lot, guys.
Wow, Matt, thank you so much. I truly, Matt, thank you so much. I truly like your closing comments there that we should continue learning. And I like one of your solutions, the visionary thinking. And I think if a lot of the business and the insurance industry were to take that approach, we will find a solution to all the challenges that we face, including the COVID, the cyber threat. So Matt, from our side, thank you so much for your time, truly appreciate it. And in line with your closing comment about we continue learning, please remember that the last InsureTalk series for this year, InsureTalk 8, will be happening on the 26th of November in your living room, in your office, some of you in your bedrooms, and it's also sponsored by Santam. We are at the end of the session today, and firstly, I would like to thank our headline sponsor, Santam. We truly appreciate the cash job. We know these are challenging times, so thank you so much. We'd also like to thank all our speakers for making time to share with us their thoughts, knowledge, and wisdom today. It means a lot from us, so thank you, and continue sharing with the industry, continue sharing online via Twitter on CN&CO website, as well as other online platforms. And more importantly, I'd like to thank all the participants who are still online. I know we're running 5 minutes over time. We'd truly like to thank you for your time, for being with us today, and for being open to accepting the wisdom and the knowledge that is shared by our panelist expert. And also, thank you so much for registering. We look forward to seeing you at the next InsureTech session on the 26th of November. And also, to reward you, we're going to give you 2.5 CPD points. And for that, we'd like to thank the IISA with the CPD points accreditation and their update on what is going on in the industry. So, my name is Litlakhano Letau, and I am a business development manager at Santam. It's been a pleasure hosting you today. And I'd just like to leave you like Matt with a quote, which says that the adventure of life is to learn. And with that said, come join us at our next adventure of InsureTech 8 on the 26th of November, sponsored by Santam. Please take care, wear your masks, social distance, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye, and see you on the 26th. From my side, sharp.